and welcome to the 32nd meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development, the first meeting of our clause-by-clause study of Bill C-12. I think everyone here is experienced with the modus operandi of committees, especially in virtual space, so I won't go over that. We have with us again today, with great pleasure, Minister Wilkinson, and joining him are Mr. Samuel Miller from the Department of Finance, Director General Corporate Finance, Natural Resources and Environment, Economic Development and Corporate Finance. We have from the Department of the Environment, John Moffat, who was with us as well last week, Assistant Deputy Minister, Environmental Protection Branch, and Douglas Nevison, who was with us last week as well, Assistant Deputy Minister of Climate Change Branch. I will now invite Minister Wilkinson to make his opening remarks.
Well, thank you for the invitation to discuss Bill C-12 with you, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. And I would start by thanking members of this committee for undertaking a timely examination of this bill. I understand it is a constituency week. With the climate crisis before us, we obviously cannot afford to wait. Over 120 countries have already made a commitment to net zero by 2050, including our biggest trading partner south of the border. Major Canadian companies have also made this commitment. As I have said, I remain very open to constructive amendments that will further strengthen C-12. I look forward to the committee's work in this regard, and I remain committed to an approach of cooperation and collaboration. That is how the parliamentary process should work, and I firmly believe that is what Canadians expect of their elected representatives. C-12 codifies the government's commitment for Canada to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 and our newly announced target for 2030. It also creates a detailed accountability and transparency regime to ensure that we methodically plan, report, and course correct on our way to net zero. En décembre dernier, nous avons publié le plan climatique.
In December of last year, we published Canada's Strengthened Climate Plan. The plan is one of the most detailed GHG reduction plans in the world. Recognizing the scientific imperative for early and ambitious action, we announced a new 2030 target of 40 to 50% reduction of GHG emissions at the Leaders' Summit on Climate in April.
2021, along with ongoing work with our American colleagues on issues including transportation and methane, will support that new target. We know more action will be required. This continued ambition is what Canadians expect, that we will continue to prioritize climate action and that we will work to achieve targets that are aligned with science. To ensure we meet our targets, C-12 requires that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change prepare two types of reports, both of which are required to be tabled in Parliament and made available to the public: progress reports and assessment reports. Progress reports will provide updates on Canada's progress towards achieving the target for the next milestone year and any additional measures that could be taken to achieve the target. Each progress report must be prepared at least 2 years before the relevant milestone year. Assessment reports, on the other hand, will explain whether the most recent target was achieved. If Canada fails to achieve a target, the minister must explain why and include a description of actions the government will take to address the failed target. Each assessment report must be prepared within 30 days of Canada submitting its GHG inventory report to the UNFCCC for the relevant target year. Le projet de loi C-12 oblige également le gouvernement.
C-12 also holds the government to account by requiring the Commissioner of Environment and Sustainable Development to regularly examine and report on the government's implementation of the climate change mitigation measures, including those undertaken to achieve each target. The bill establishes an advisory board of up to 15 members, which will provide advice to the minister and conduct engagement on pathways to achieve net zero by 2050. The advisory board must submit an annual report, and the minister must publicly respond to their advice.
This is in addition to our existing reporting requirements under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. My department has developed a chart outlining the suite of reporting requirements and transparency mechanisms which will be provided to this committee. By putting our climate obligations into law, the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act will ensure that governments are accountable for and transparent about their actions to combat climate change. C12 will require all future governments to table strong climate plans based on science to address the threat of climate change. Canadians are counting on us to have constructive discussions to strengthen this legislation, but they are also looking for us to enshrine the commitment to net zero and a pathway to get there in law. I look forward to the robust discussion on C12 at this committee, but I also hope that this legislation will be moved forward as expeditiously as possible. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Alors...
Thank you, Minister. We have about an hour and a half, which means we will have time for 3 rounds of questions. One will be 6 minutes long and the other 5. And as members already know, we are moving to a second panel with an hour and a half at 4 o'clock. So let's start with Mr. Albas for 6 minutes.
Passing my time on to the member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Okay, Ms. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Dan for this unexpected opportunity. Thank you very much. And to the Minister, thank you for being before committee, and thank you for your personal commitment to climate action. It's evident, and you know you have my deepest respect in knowing that you care, and that when you say, quote, "we cannot afford to wait," unquote, I firmly believe you mean it, which is why I'm very disappointed with this legislation. My first question is, why in developing this legislation, it seems apparent that Environment Canada and Climate Change chose not to decide to study the Climate Accountability Acts of other countries, the UK, New Zealand, Denmark, and to do better than what they recommend. And in 3 places, I note the differences between those legislation, that we don't start right away with a 5-year target with 5 years from when the legislation started as a milestone year. We don't include carbon budgets. We don't rely on an expert committee of expertise that reports to the whole Parliament and actually sets those carbon budgets for the government. So there must have been a decision not to look at the gold standard of climate accountability acts elsewhere in the world. And I wonder why not.
Thank you for the series of questions, and certainly thank you for your ongoing commitment to the climate issue, which I know is very deeply felt. So we did certainly look at all of the other relevant acts around the world, and we came to conclusions that we were going to develop something that we felt fit best within the Canadian context. As you will know, we have established an expert panel. The expert panel is one piece of this. The role for the Environment and Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development is another piece. In some other jurisdictions, those roles are fused. But in this case, the Commissioner does the review and effectively the auditing of that function. The expert panel is appointed to provide advice to the government, which is public. It must be responded to by the Minister every year. And so that piece of it is, we think, the gold standard in terms of how we actually are moving forward. With respect to other elements of the bill, certainly, as I say, we look very closely at those. We believe that actually setting 5-year rolling targets that essentially embed in them emissions relating to sectors is the right way to go in Canada, a federal system. And we believe that it is essentially similar in terms of outcomes as to what you get from carbon budgets. And there are many other countries, including Denmark and Scotland and others, that have gone the same direction that Canada has.
But with all due respect, Mr. Minister, the bill refers to an advisory committee, not an expert committee. You've only got one climate scientist on the current. I mean, I do think it was disrespectful to this committee and the parliamentary process to jump the gun and appoint an advisory committee before the bill had even a single witness to talk about why so many people and experts believe this should model ourselves much more on the UK Climate Committee, which is universally respected for its expertise. You've got one climate scientist on your advisory body, and Professor Donner has been clear that Canada's climate target for 2030 should be, if we're going to pull our fair share, somewhere between 96 and 99% reductions below the emissions today. But he'll be surrounded by other stakeholders who have other views. So I wonder if you will reconsider the composition of this, and more than the people on it, the structure of it to be much more like a UK expert body that sets carbon budgets.
Thank you for the comment. I would say, to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised at the comment, because certainly the focus for us is actually on getting the expert panel working, because the issue is so important and so timely. And that is one of the reasons why we did move forward with it. I would say that achieving net zero is going to require the support and engagement from all parts of society. That includes provinces and territories. It includes Indigenous peoples and youth and civil society and range of sectors within the private sector. We have launched an independent net zero advisory body that is filled with exceptional Canadians that bridge a wide range of experiences and expertise, including sectoral expertise, that will enable us to make the kind of progress that we need to make going forward. And I can certainly go through the bios of the people who are on that committee. They are an exceptional group of folks that bring together a range of perspectives from across the piece to ensure that the government is getting the best advice with respect to pathways to achieve net zero.
But Mr. Minister, with all due respect, we know the only pathway to meet net zero, to meet and hold to 1.5 degrees, which is the goal of the Paris Agreement. Net zero by 2050 is meaningless if we've blown the carbon budget to get to 1.5 degrees by 2030. And it's, I've cited to you before in Parliament the very excellent description of carbon budgets from Mark Carney at page 273 of his book Values. So I won't read it out here. We're going to blow any chance of hitting 1.5 well before 2030, and everyone knows it. That to have an accountability, a process that involves massive consultations for every step, builds in delays that could defeat the whole purpose of ensuring that we meet our Paris target of holding to 1.5 degrees. Are you open to consideration of amendments to have the kind of robust expert body that the UK has had to hold to its Climate Accountability Act, which has worked?
So first of all, I would correct you with respect to consultations that will require enormous obligations that will impede progress. It does require consultation. We do believe that actually Canadians want to have a voice in this. We do believe that industry and environmental organizations want to have a voice as we go through the process of establishing targets. That's important, and that is something that we have embedded in this legislation. We believe that this body, which has been set up with extremely thoughtful folks coming from across the spectrum, will provide the kind of advice that Canada needs to make the progress it needs to move going forward. As you saw, Canada actually ratcheted significantly up its level of ambition recently at the Earth Summit alongside our partners. And we certainly are very sensitive, as will that body be, with respect to the guidance that is in this act relating to needing to be guided by science, that includes ensuring that 1.5 degrees in 2050 remains something that actually is on the table.
Good. We have to go now to Mr. Longfield, who will be splitting with Mr. Saini, as I understand it.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair, and thank you. And thank you to the Minister for being here and the officials that we'll be speaking with in the last half hour of this panel. Over the last several months, I've been hearing from a lot of Guelphites on C12, many of whom have offered their support for this legislation. They're lending ideas already. They've told me that the bill needs to be prioritized and passed as soon as possible. And they're offering meaningful support for us to have these discussions. But of particular interest to my constituents was the piece in this legislation that offers a greater opportunity for participation of Canadians on the climate objectives in the climate crisis. Could the Minister elaborate on this by letting us know how we're going to be engaging with Canadians on this legislation as we move forward with it?
So thank you for that very important question. Hearing from Canadians, scientists, and experts is extremely important. It's important in a whole range of perspectives in terms of getting to the right answers, but it's also important in terms of building consensus in terms of the decisions that are going to have to be made going forward. Section 13 of the bill provides that the Minister of Environment must, when setting or amending a national greenhouse gas emissions target or an action plan, provides an opportunity for Canadians, experts, Indigenous peoples, and other governments to contribute their thoughts and perspectives. For instance, those opportunities could be both virtual, for instance, in a webinar or social media, or in in-person meetings, roundtables, and assemblies. In addition, the Independent Net Zero Advisory Body is mandated to engage Canadians in a transparent and inclusive process and provide advice to the Minister on pathways to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. We think this is very important.
Thank you. And you've also mentioned in your testimony about accountability. As Vice Chair of the Standing Committee for Public Accounts, I've had the opportunity to do a lot of work with the Auditor General and the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. I was pleased to see that this legislation will make use of their auditing to hold the government of the day accountable to climate action. Could the Minister explain the importance of this bill's accountability tools?
Sure. Thank you again for the question. Committing ourselves to transparency and accountability is certainly important because it helps people and businesses plan, and investors know that they can count on Canada to be a great place to invest. It also sets very clear goals that Canadians expect us to deliver on, and they will hold our government and any future government to account if we don't. There are a wide range of accountability measures outlined in the Act, and I think you are all very familiar with those. The Act is also proactive. It requires the federal government to bring forward climate plans to meet targets based on the best available science once every target. The Net Zero panel will also publicly report, and the Minister is required to respond. And I've also indicated publicly that I am open to going further with respect to accountability measures, and have noted that I would be pleased to see that the bill provide additional progress reports in 2023 and 2025, ensuring 2 reviews on the implementation of the Government of Canada's commitments to the Office of the Auditor General in advance of 2030, with the first to occur no later than 2024, and more prescriptive requirements for what the government must include in progress reports and the emissions reduction plan. All of these will ensure accountability and transparency.
Are you handing it off to Mr.?
I am.
Yeah, okay.
Please.
Mr. Saini?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good to see you again, Minister. Thank you for coming again today and with your officials. I'm going to ask a more personal question, because this is some of the comments that I've been receiving from my constituents here in Kitchener Centre, is that they're extremely happy that we're taking strong measures to fight the climate crisis, including by tabling this important piece of legislation. I want to ask, through you, Chair, to the Minister, if you could maybe help my constituents who may be listening what this bill does.
Thank you for the question. I would start just by saying that Bill C-12 is intended to hold the federal government to its commitment to achieve net zero by 2050, and all governments henceforth, and to exceeding our 2030 Paris target. The Act requires the Government of Canada to set national targets every 5 years, starting in 2030, for the reduction of GHGs in Canada in order to achieve that net zero by 2050. It will hold the government to account through a process to achieve that target, and targets must be based on the best scientific information available and Canada's international climate commitments. These targets and their associated emissions reductions plans will be developed with advice from the Independent Net Zero Advisory Body and consultations with Canadians. There are a whole range of documents that will be fully public based on the various reporting mechanisms. And more broadly, I think the Act demonstrates to Canadians and the global community the Government of Canada's ongoing commitment to taking bold action on climate change.
I want to ask you a question about the advisory body, because that's been brought up already, but I'd like to follow up on the idea that one of the key aspects of this bill, which we know, is the Net Zero Advisory Panel. Having an independent and expert-based panel is essential to making sure that we're accountable. For the benefit, again, from my constituents who may be listening here in Kitchener Centre, could you please expand a little bit on this panel, on what will it do exactly?
Sure, thank you. The green transition of Canada's economy is required to achieve net zero. It requires advanced planning, investments in technology development, and then deploying those technologies. And these measures will mean significant changes to our daily lives in the decades ahead. The launch of the advisory panel creates an independent and credible platform to gather ideas, research, and analysis on the many pathways to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 across Canada, and to do so in a manner that will ensure the prosperity and economic health of Canada in the future. The advisory panel is comprised of eminent Canadians drawn from all regions of this country and from various sectors and perspectives. The advisory body's analysis is going to support the Government of Canada in making informed choices with respect to reducing emissions and growing our economy. The primary mandate, as you know, is to provide advice on the most promising pathways to achieve net zero by 2050. We certainly recognize the need that this independent body to have the resources to carry out their work, and that is why there is a dedicated budget of over $15 million over the next 3 years and a dedicated secretariat to support their work. The advisory body going forward will establish a transparent and inclusive process to
Merci.
engage with stakeholders.
Merci beaucoup. Alors,
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Madame Michaud, à vous.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for coming to answer our questions. It's much appreciated. Thank you, witnesses, for coming. In its current version, the bill doesn't have any targets for GHG reductions. In fact, in 7.2, it says that you are going to set the target in the 6 months after the implementation or coming into force of this act. But there seems to be a whole range of targets that are set for now until 2030. I have a question about this range. Minister Guilbeault seems to have a very important position in your department, and he said that this new target would be included in the bill. Could you confirm that, please, or explain it? Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yes, the goal for 2030 will be in the legislation, and it will be announced publicly. As I said already, the announcement of new targets of 40 to 45% will be the target that is mentioned in the legislation. And so we can expect the government to table an amendment to remove 7.2, the part of 7.2 that says that targets are going to be set after the coming into force of the legislation, because it's actually going to be in the legislation. Is that correct? Answer, yes. The new target for Canada, NDC, yes, we are very willing to put that index as a target in the bill. All right, well, if you're open to that, are you also open to putting a mandatory minimum target? For example, in the Paris Accord, it says that there could be problems if you have too ambitious targets. I was wondering whether you were also open to including the targets that are in the Paris Accord and not just the ones that you have mentioned already. I'm not quite sure I fully understand your question, but we do have a target that we announced with our partner countries, such as Japan, the U.S., and others, and that is a target for 2030. We are open to putting that in the legislation, but yes, of course, in the future, if we can make more progress, perhaps we can have other targets in the future. Thank you very much. As for partner countries, there are 27 countries in the European Union, and they are also calculating their reductions of GHGs, and they are using the year 1996, and we are using 2005 as our reference year. But you have to remember that there were huge increases between 1990 and 2006. It looks like Canada gave a holiday to the oil companies. Let me give you an example. In 1990, Canada emitted about 643 tons of GHGs, and a few years later, it was over 700, and by taking in 2005 as base year, the target isn't as ambitious because we are trying to reduce everything by 9 megatons. But if you look at 1990 to 2005, you can see that rather than reducing GHG emissions, in Canada, they increased. So in Canada, there's a huge difference compared to our methods of calculation compared to other countries. So I was wondering whether your government would be willing to use 1990 as its reference year for its future projections rather than the year 2005. Thank you for the question. Canada used the year 2005 from the outset, from the time we set targets, and we are going to continue to do so. I think a lot of other countries also use 2005 as a reference year. You did make a valid point. All countries should use the same base year to ensure that there are equivalencies between the different countries and citizens are able to understand. But I must also say that the 2015 bill that you referred to used the year 2005, and the target was 30,000 by 2030. All right, thank you very much. That was a very valid point, Mr. Minister. You've talked about transparency by our international partners, and there has to be some clarity as well. I was wondering whether you were open to publishing your targets by using the year 1990 rather than 2005. Well, as I said earlier, Canada has done a lot of work and used the reference year 2005. We agree with a lot of other countries who have done the same thing. And the work was done using that reference year. I do agree with you, though, that we have to have more conversations with the global community so that every country uses the same base year so that we can all understand how the countries are doing and being able to compare them to each other. Mr. Bacharach.
Minister, for being with us today to answer our questions. I understand that we're covering some well-trodden ground, but I wanted to start with the matter of the 2025 milestone. So much of the feedback and response we've heard from constituents and from civil society is around this perceived need for some sort of near-term milestone or accountability measure that shows we're on track. And I think when we look at the UK model, one of the big successes was that right out of the gate, they set a 5-year carbon budget right away, a near-term budget, which they not only met but exceeded. Could you explain to the committee why it is so difficult, in your view, for your government to set a 2025 milestone?
Well, I would say to you that there's a few things. Certainly all of the focus of the work that we have done and many other countries have done have been focused on achieving reductions to 2030. That was true with the Pan-Canadian Framework. That was certainly true also with Canada's Strengthened Climate Plan. That was true if you watched the Earth Summit in terms of the commitments that were made by Japan and the United States, the European Union and the United Kingdom. They were all focused on a 2030 target. But I do think that it's important, and I've heard some of the comments and the thoughts that we do think about what lies behind the request for the 2025 target. And I do believe that's enhanced transparency and accountability. I have said, including in my opening remarks, that we are open to a number of improvements with respect to transparency and accountability so that progress can be tracked through the coming decade.
Thank you, Minister. I think and it's good to hear that your willingness to consider accountability measures in the near term. I believe what's being asked for is a sense that we're on track because we've missed so many of our targets in the past. And in order to determine whether we're on track, we have to define what on track actually means. My understanding is that your department conducts modeling exercises that essentially map out the trajectory for declining emissions between now and 2030. Could that modeling not tell us where we expect to be, if not where we need to be in 2025?
Well, yes, and I think, as you will know, modeling is an imprecise art, but yes, it is intended to essentially incorporate all of the various initiatives that the government is taking, whether those are investments or the price on or regulatory changes, to ensure that we are reducing emissions in line with our expectations. And I would say the National Inventory Report that was released a few weeks ago showed us that we were actually exactly on track with where we thought we would be. if we were, on track to meet our target. So that is why I say certainly having more frequent accountability reports, which actually look at whether Canada is on track, and if in fact it is not on track, what it's going to do to get back on track, is certainly something that we are open to, and I look forward to the conversations that the committee will have.
Now, going back to the issue of carbon budgets versus emissions targets, and I believe some of my colleagues have covered this a little bit, but I heard in one of your responses that you felt that the target approach that you've taken here, quote, fit best in the Canadian context. Now, I've heard this before, but I've never heard it explained what it is about the Canadian context that makes the carbon budget approach, in your view, not the best approach to take. Could you unpack that and explain precisely why you chose not to take the approach the UK did, which was so successful?
So thank you for the question. I would say there's probably different ways that you can approach the issue of carbon budgeting. One is on the basis of geography, and the other is on the basis of sector. I would tell you that in a country like Canada, which is a federal, not a unitary state, applying a carbon budget on a provincial basis is probably not the recipe for success and for collaborative working arrangements between different levels of government. On a sectoral basis, you're essentially assigning different levels to different sectors. And what I'm saying to you is we actually have established a target system that rolls every 5 years that essentially embeds in it targets with respect to sectoral, because you can actually roll that out of, by and large, out of the overall targets. It's not that different. So I think when people actually are getting a little bit fussed about this, they're getting a little bit fussed about something that is a bit of dancing on the head of a pin.
Okay, perhaps I'll move along to my next question. I believe I'm running out of time, but we all know that the real work here comes not in setting the targets, but in the emissions reduction plans that map out the way that we're going to meet those targets. Can you confirm that the intention is for the plans that are developed under this act to demonstrate clearly how they're going to achieve the targets for each milestone year? And are you open to amendments that would require additional detail to ensure that we really understand that those plans are up to the task of meeting the targets?
So yes, the plan is essentially intended to demonstrate how you are going to make progress towards the target. I would be a little bit careful about saying at the beginning of a period that you know necessarily everything that you're going to have to do over the coming number of years in order to achieve the targets. You obviously have to know most of it. But I do think you've got to account for the fact that you're going to continue to have need to have climate action as you move through those years. In the same way that people have said, well, why did the government commit to a 40 to 45% target when right now it clearly knows how it's going to get to 36? And the answer is because Canadians will expect that the next budget and the next budget and the next budget are going to continue to prioritize climate action, and we need to continue to be ambitious going forward given the scale of the problem. So yes, these emissions reductions plans do need to be sufficiently detailed that you can map out how you're going to make the progress that you need to make towards the target.
Thanks. So we'll go to the second round now, which will be kicked off, if I'm not mistaken, by Mr. Redekop for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks, Minister, for being here. Just want to carry on right there. You talked about the targets and the way they're changing. And of course, you would know that it was 30% with no carbon tax. Then we added a carbon tax, or you increased the carbon tax. Then you came out with the budget that said 36%, and I still think it's a typo because a few days later, the Prime Minister corrected it to 40 to 45%. I was speaking with some stakeholders who were caught unaware of these increases until they saw them, on social media. And so I guess you speak of collaboration. And so between when the budget was released on April 19th and when the Prime Minister announced the targets on April 22nd, whom specifically did you consult and who did you collaborate with during that 60-hour window on these new increased targets?
Well, certainly we had lots of conversations with respect to Canadians about what they expect of their government with respect to climate ambition. I will tell you that in the online survey that was actually developed and implemented, over 90% of Canadians were looking for a much more ambitious target. But certainly beyond that, we consulted with provinces and territories, with the major Indigenous organizations discussing the need for enhanced ambition. And at the end of the day, we've made significant progress in the budget to get to 36%, which is well below the initial target. And Canadians would just think that we were crazy in the face of a climate crisis if we said, oh, we're done. We're not going to do anything for the next 9 years. That would just be ridiculous. So, there is a need for ambition. It needs to be attainable, but there's a need for ambition, and that's what the new target represents.
I agree totally. I think attainability is really key here. And so I guess, again, specifically, if you're saying you did collaborate and consult with people between this increase from 36 to 40 to 45. So if I called the Minister of the Environment in Saskatchewan, would he tell me that he received a phone call from you during those 60 hours about consultations, or what other people did you speak to?
Well, let me just first of all clarify. What I said is we were very clear that we were going to be developing a new target. In the Strengthened Climate Plan, we talked about moving up a range to a higher number and that we would consult. And we did that over the course of the few months before we actually announced the new target. With respect to the minister in Saskatchewan, I spoke to him the day before I announced the target. And I said to him that we were at 36% in the budget. We knew we needed to be significantly more ambitious, and we would be bringing forward a more ambitious target. We had that conversation, in fact, just hours before the target was released.
Excellent. Now, you also spoke of course corrections, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at here. So, I come from business. In order to achieve goals, you have to have lots of planning and you have to invest lots of money. And in order to do that properly, you require some stability as you're looking forward into the future. Now, stakeholders have complained that when the goalposts keep moving, it's very difficult to implement a plan. And so as we move forward, are you going to keep moving those goalposts? And if so, how do you expect provinces and companies to make the investments they need to make when they have to keep going back and throwing the plan out and coming up with a new one?
Well, I agree with you entirely, and I also come from the business community, so I understand the importance of certainty with respect to business investment. And certainly, it has been very clear, and this government has been very clear, and most other parties in the parliament have been very clear that there was a need for enhanced ambition. That's not new. That's been something that people have been talking about for years. It is in line with science and what science tells us we must do. So there's no big surprise here. But what I would say is they do require certainty with respect to major policy instruments. And that's why I was very pleased a few weeks ago to see the Conservative Party actually endorse a carbon tax and a clean fuel standard, two policies they have been fighting for the past number of years, and things that are really important in terms of having certainty. So I welcome the Conservative Party actually coming to the party.
So with this 40 to 45% target, is it your expectation that every single province will have to reduce by that same 40 to 45%, or do some provinces have different targets? What's your thinking there?
Well, I mean, in this country, we have a constitution. The federal government has to respect provincial jurisdiction. We are not in a position to tell provinces what their targets need to be. But there certainly are provinces that have taken up the climate challenge in a much more aggressive way. I would point to Le Gouvernement du Québec, the government of British Columbia, the government of Nova Scotia, as real climate champions on this issue. But with respect to the federal government, we are using tools that fall within federal jurisdiction. That includes the price on pollution, the clean fuel standard, a range of other regulatory mechanisms, and significant investments that we are making to work with large emitters across this country, including very much in Alberta and Saskatchewan, to ensure that we're actually working towards reducing emissions in a way that's consistent with economic prosperity.
And in Saskatchewan, have you done analysis on the economic impacts in terms of jobs that this would have?
Quickly, please, Mr.
Well,
Minister.
I think you'd have to be a little more precise with this, but I think our view would be that there is an enormous economic opportunity here, and Canadians need to seize it. We are moving as a global community to a lower carbon future. We need to actually prepare Canada to be successful in that future.
Thanks, Mr. Baker.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being with us here today. Minister, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I would say, Minister, that my constituents in Etobicoke Centre are very concerned about the impact of climate change, and I think they expect us to do everything possible to protect the planet. I think they expect the Government of Canada to ensure that our emissions in Canada and globally, to the degree necessary, are reduced to achieve that objective. Over the last few months, our government has taken important steps and announced significant investments, including in the last budget, to fight climate change. Just a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister announced new emission reductions targets. So for the sake of my constituents in Etobicoke Centre, could you summarize for them what emission reduction targets our government has committed to, and to what degree this will reduce our emissions?
Thank you for that very important question. I think constituents in many ridings around the country are asking similar questions. As you know very well, climate change is both an existential threat to humanity, but it's also a massive economic opportunity for countries that move early and move aggressively. When our government took power 5 years ago, Canada's emissions were going the wrong way, on track to be 12% higher in 2030 versus where they were in 2005. We developed Canada's first national climate plan that will reduce emissions dramatically. In December, we brought forward a strengthened climate plan that provides a very detailed pathway for Canada to exceed its initial Paris Agreement targets. The plan represents one of the most detailed plans that exists out there in the world. But we knew we needed to do more. Science tells us that we need to do more to avoid catastrophic effects. And so in April, the Prime Minister announced the new target of 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. And just to put that in context, that's an increase of up to 50% over our previous target. That was made alongside our partners and friends, the United States, Japan, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. Collectively now, half of the world's GDP is now aligned with the goal of limiting temperature increase to 1.5%. It is both ambitious and attainable, puts us on a credible path to net zero. This legislation is extremely important in ensuring that that continues.
Thank you, Minister. And Minister, could you summarize, again, for the benefit of my constituents in Etobicoke Centre, who may not follow this very, very closely, how the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act fits in with our Paris commitments?
Well, as I mentioned, I mean, during the Leaders Summit, we announced the new target, and that is a significant increase. The Paris Agreement, as Ms. May pointed out, calls on countries to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius with a focus on 1.5 degree. The Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act is aligned with the Paris Agreement's requirement for increasing ambition over time. And in addition, when setting greenhouse gas emissions targets, the minister needs to take into account the best scientific information available, as well as our international commitment. As we work towards these new ambitious targets, the bill makes clear that we need to look beyond 2030 and to ensure that governments of all stripes in the future are thinking through how we actually take the steps we need to achieve net zero by 2050. And that is what this bill does.
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Chair, I think your mic is up. Your boom
Sorry,
is up. There we go.
Thank you. I do this all the time. Is that it, Mr. Baker? Is it? Do you have another question? No.
That's
okay, all. Good. Madame Michaud, 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais revenir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to come back on the 40 to 45% and the reference year 2005. In order to respect the 30% minimum, we should have 511 megaton reduction, or depending on how you calculate it, according to should be, according to Environment Canada, 588 megatons. So we're falling short of the target. Have there been new projections by the department? We'd certainly like to get them if you have them. We'd like to see the best case scenario and perhaps the more pessimistic scenarios, because between now and 2030, we may or not achieve these. So how can you say 40 to 45% when the data of your own department proposes a more pessimistic scenario? Sorry about that. Thank you for the question. Now, you're using numbers that are provided by the Pan-Canadian plan or framework. We have done a lot more work since then with regulatory measures as well. And we've reinforced the plan, in fact. We found a number of other measures which will reduce GHG, pardon me. So this will, in fact, have some impact on the projections made by the departments. For 2020-21, the projections are closely reflected. It will be published in the next few weeks by the department. While the announcements made in the budget 2021 if the new measures had been applied, we would have a reduction of 36% of greenhouse gas emissions. However, you're talking 40 to 45%, so there's quite a gap there. In your opening statement, you indicated that you've been working in concert with your American colleagues. So does this new cooperation with the Americans overlay and get rid of this gap? We are, in fact, working in close collaboration with the Americans, particularly in measures dealing with transportation, but other opportunities which are also present. Electrification, hydro exports, for example. Quebec is exporting quite a bit of hydroelectric power. These efforts are being reflected in the 36%. Yes, we should do more. We must do more. We know we have to go further than that. There were 9 years. Over 90% of Canadians think we should do more. It's been seen in all the surveys. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, you've already established the Net Zero Advisory Body, but prior to finalizing the legislation that enables its establishment, I think for many people it feels a little bit like putting the cart before the horse. Why not wait until C12 has been finalized before appointing members to the advisory body?
Well, I would say to you that this is a climate crisis. I think your party, my party, the Bloc Québécois, and the Green Party all voted to indicate this is a crisis. It's a crisis on which we have a finite amount of time to make the kind of progress that we need to make. The decision was mine. It was to establish a ministerial panel to begin the work of assessing pathways to net zero by 2050 to ensure that we were making the progress we need to make. Once this bill is passed through both the House of Commons and the Senate, it will become law, and there will be a governor and council panel. My expectation is it will be very similar, but that is something that will only happen once it passes through Parliament.
Can I assume then that you're open to amendments that would change the criteria for appointments to that body?
Well, I would say, look, the committee is its own master, and it will have conversations about the areas of the bill that it thinks need to be strengthened. What I would say to you is this is an amazing group of folks. I would encourage you to meet them at some point, who come from a wide range of experiences and perspectives on this issue. I'm sure that within that room, they are having some very, very interesting and forthright conversations about how to make this kind of progress. I have full confidence in it, and I think that we've structured it in the appropriate way, but I'm not going to opine on the powers of the committee. That's up to you folks.
One more quick question, if I may, Mr. Chair. Minister, one of your colleagues speaking in the House mentioned that, in his opinion, C12 provides an ideal evidentiary base for a potential plaintiff to bring forth climate change litigation against the government for inaction. Has this aspect of C12 been confirmed through a legal review? And if so, would you be willing to table that review with the committee?
You know, whenever there is a law that is put into place, there is the potential for people or organizations to see whether or not it can be litigated or not. And I'm not going to opine on whether or not this is something that could be litigated through the courts, but certainly I know that there are people who have different perspectives. At the end of the day, this is intended to be a forcing function. It's intended to make governments take action, and that is the whole structure and focus, to ensure that we can never in this country have again a government like Stephen Harper's, which signed up to a target and never had a plan.
Okay, Mr. Genereux for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. Genereux was going to pass it on to me.
Well, then that's good. Okay, so we'll.
Okay. No, as long as you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Minister, for being here today, and to the officials for what you do for Canada. Minister, you've said a few things today in regards to the advisory group. You've called it a ministerial panel. You've also called it an independent expert committee, and you've also the bill calls it an advisory committee. Which is it?
It is an independent expert advisory committee that is appointed by the minister. They have a terms of reference. They are an independent body. They have an independent budget. They have a secretariat that's a dedicated secretariat, and they are intended to provide advice to me, and I am required to respond to that advice.
But they are appointed by you, and at the same token, they serve at the pleasure of the minister. Is that correct?
Well, as many advisory bodies do in the federal government, yes, they are appointed by me. They are intended to do work as a group and provide independent advice to the minister. And they are drawn from a range of different sectors and a range of different perspectives to ensure that we're actually getting good advice that comes external to the government, which is something that I think most Canadians would think is a good thing.
Yeah, well, I would agree with MP Bachrach that it's a little bit presumptuous for you to be appointing a group. Now, the bill in front of us, C-12, lays out how the advisory group is reimbursed for expenses. Now, obviously, the bill hasn't passed. If the group is already working, are these people being reimbursed right now? Or where is that money? If that's the case, Minister, where's the money coming from?
So two things. First is, I don't think it's presumptuous at all. Climate change is a crisis. Ministers require appropriate forms for advice. And so irrespective of whether this bill proceeds through Parliament, there's a ministerial body that is actually providing important advice on the climate crisis to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. With respect to funding, there was funding in the Strength and Climate Plan for the ministerial panel, and their expenses are covered if there are expenses. But I would tell you, in the COVID world, there hasn't been much in the way of travel, so those expenses would be pretty limited.
So where's the money coming from? Is it coming from your own budgets right now?
It comes from allocations flowing to the Department of the Environment and Climate Change, yes.
Okay, and have those been in the mains?
Well, they were in the Strength and Climate Plan, so they probably are in the mains next year, I think.
Okay, if you could maybe ask your officials to maybe refer that to us.
Can confirm that, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I think John Moffat can confirm it right now if you want.
No, we'll have him come in a little bit later then. This bill sets out that the advisory group is covered under the Workplace Compensation Act in case of injury due to employment. As the bill hasn't passed, if the group is the group not covered, or are they being counted as employees, as you mentioned, under another part of the estimates?
Well, once again, I'm happy to have the one of my officials respond to the specifics around the Workplace Compensation Act.
Wow. Again, Minister, this is your legislation. So ultimately, Minister, if the bill that creates
I'm happy
the group,
to have Mr. Moffat actually provide the answer right now.
Well, I can ask him later if you don't know. So okay. I'll go next.
Mr. Moffat,
Minister.
get ready. You're going to get a question on it.
Yeah. Ultimately, Minister, if the bill that creates the group doesn't need to pass for you to create the group, then why is it even in the bill? It surely must be redundant. It can be removed.
Well, absolutely, it's not redundant. I mean, at the end of the day, we would like to see an expert advisory panel or an expert advisory body that is part of advising all future governments. The ministerial panel is not part of the legislation. It is an advisory body that advises the minister. As I said before, once the legislation passes through Parliament, these become governor and council appointments, and they are subject to the same kinds of things, which is it would require changes to the law to actually amend this. And I mean, at the end of the day, this is intended to be a forcing function on all future governments to ensure that they take climate action seriously.
So, Minister, in Bill C-28, the SEPA bill, it refers to a right to a healthy environment, which, and I quote, may be balanced with relevant factors, including social, economic, health, and scientific factors, end quote. Would you support adding similar language to this bill to ensure that when setting targets and creating plans that reductions be balanced with social and economic factors in mind?
So again, I am not the master of the committee. You folks are going to have discussions and decide.
But it is your legislation, Minister, so please answer the question.
What you think is appropriate. What I would say to you is this is the issue around targets is a science issue. At the end of the day, you either believe in science or you don't.
But don't you believe that there's relevant factors?
The focus needs to be ensuring that we actually understand what science tells us we need to do in order to actually ensure this world is a livable world. And to do that in a manner that takes into account economic and social as to how we actually make the progress. That's exactly what the net zero body is supposed to do.
It seems strange to me that you're okay with a balance in your Environmental Protection Act bill, but not this one. Do you agree? Do you not agree that striking a balance is important?
very quickly.
Well, what I would say to you is, do you believe in climate change or not? I mean,
well,
at the end of the day, to have a livable world in the future, you must have a net zero world by 2050. That's the bottom line. At the end of the day, you either believe that or you don't.
Okay, Minister, that's a terrible answer. I really wish you'd come to actually speak to these issues. There are people in this country that are looking for leadership, not just of one particular ideology, but to see them included in their legislation.
Okay, Minister Alves, please. I don't have control of mute apparently, so I can't do much about this. But we'll go to Ms. Sachs now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Minister Wilkinson for joining us today. I thank you for your leadership in getting C12 to committee, as it is certainly an important issue to Canadians. One of the top issues of concern for my constituents here in York Centre certainly is climate change, and they do know that it's real and the science behind it. They're seeing the dangerous trajectory Conservatives put us on when they were in government, and they understand that failing to take action on the climate crisis is not only detrimental to our environment, but also to the economy. Minister, can you discuss what the economic and environmental risks to Canada are and would be if we don't move forward with our net zero legislation?
Thank you, and I certainly agree. When our government took office, as I said, 5 years ago, Canada's emissions were going very much in the wrong way, and they would have been 12% higher by 2030 versus 2005. Both the International Paris Agreement and the Canadian Net Zero Accountability Act recognize the importance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, global human-caused CO2 emissions must reach net zero around 2050 to achieve 1.5 degrees. Canadians are already experiencing significant impacts of a changing climate. Our Canada is actually changing at twice the average rate around the world, and in the north, it's 3 times. And there are enormous impacts of that. The Bank of Canada found that climate change could cost the economy between $21 and $43 billion a year by 2050 if no action is taken. The Insurance Bureau of Canada has put out its own set of figures, and we've all seen some of the extreme weather events around Fort McMurray in BC with respect to forest fires. This is real. It is happening. It's a science issue. It's not a debate. It's a science issue. And these effects are expected to intensify in the future. Already, there's a lot of global momentum. 120 countries have adopted this science-based target. Canada has an opportunity to address the potential impacts of climate change and to ensure that we're moving towards an economy that will provide the products and services that people in a low-carbon world are going to want, and to ensure that we can actually have a prosperous economy that will sustain and grow good middle-class jobs. And that's the focus of this bill.
Thank you, Minister. And both for my constituents and myself as a mother, I can say it's an important moment right now to change our habits and in order to improve our environment and also our economy. I'd like to ask another question. The understanding that this bill will enable us to move forward and seize the opportunities of a low-carbon economy. Minister, can you expand on the transparency aspect of the bill?
Yeah, I mean, that's at the heart of what this bill is trying to achieve. In addition to setting us on the right path to achieve net zero, it builds a system that's going to be more transparent and force governments to be more accountable. In terms of transparency, the Act will require the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to table in Parliament an emissions reduction plan, a progress report, assessment reports for each target. It will require the Minister of Finance, in working with the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, to publish annual report respecting key measures that the federal public administration has taken to manage its financial risks relating to climate change. It provides a mandate for the Government of Canada to describe all of its actions it will take in order to actually achieve a missed target. And it provides for public participation, both through the Net Zero Advisory Body, but also through a range of other mechanisms. It, as I said, provides significant transparency and accountability. I've already outlined in my opening remarks some of the areas where we're open to going further, and I look forward to the deliberations that the committee will have.
Thank you, Minister. And Mr. Chair, that's all the questions I have for the moment.
Okay, thank you. So the Minister, we knew ahead of time that the Minister would be with us for 1 hour, and it's right up to 1 hour now. And so, Minister, thank you for being here to talk about the bill and answer questions about the bill. And we now have Mr. Moffat, Mr. Miller, and Mr. Nevison.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you again. With us for a half hour, so one round of questioning, and then we'll have a quick break to bring in the next panel, and we'll have 90 minutes, which with witness statements would give us 2 rounds. So is it Mr. Albus who's kicking off this round?
I believe so, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead. So you've got 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I may be splitting my time
Sure.
with MP MacLeod or MP May if I have some time left.
Yeah.
Let's just start off with first of all, the minister has described. First of all, thank you to our witnesses for the work you do for the people of Canada. The minister described the advisory committee in C12 in many different ways. One he referred to as a ministerial panel. Now, it's my assumption that this ministerial panel is a separate body than what is proposed in C12 because they are being compensated from the department itself and not from the legislative authority in this bill. Is that the case?
Is that from Mr. Moffat?
Mr. Chair, I can take that question.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question, member. It is currently, coming back to one of the questions that you posed to the minister, there is no funding for the Net Zero Advisory Body in Mains for 21-22. The funding was approved in the budget, but is now going through the Treasury Board process. And as a result, it will show up in future estimates there. In terms of the body itself, it is a voluntary group at this point in time, serving, as you said, at pleasure on appointment by the minister. With the coming into force of C12, whenever that happens, the proposal would be that this would become a governor and council appointed body.
So what does your department call this group right now formally? What's its official name?
We refer to it as the Net Zero Advisory Body.
Okay, because the minister announced this as being the advisory committee in the House of Commons. Why are they 2 different things?
We have a terms of reference on ECCC, Environment Climate Change Canada's website, and it refers to the Net Zero Advisory Body.
Okay, could you please send us that would be most helpful to our work. I'm just interested in because the minister seems to have said that this advisory committee that C12 would create was the exact same thing that was that he referred to as his ministerial panel. Anyway, I'm kind of shocked by that, Mr. Chair, because, when you make a statement in the House in regards to this, you would imagine that the government wouldn't be saying it's one thing when it's really another. Could either you or Mr. Moffat please tell us about my question in regards to the workforce, workers' compensation, and the eligibility for this ministerial panel?
Once the panel is stood up as under a governor and council appointment, it will become, the employees will be deemed employees in the federal public administration. So they will be subject to the requirements under that particular stipulation.
All right, thank you. I'd like to pass the remainder of my time to MP May.
Thank you so much, Dan. I want to ask these questions of John Moffat. And there were a couple of points in the minister's testimony to us in which he reflected inconsistencies between, and I don't know that he's aware there are inconsistencies between what we agreed to do in Paris and what he thinks we've agreed to do. So I want to put them to you. One is that we know from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, October 2018 special report on 1.5, that it is not true to say that if we get to net zero by 2050, we have held to 1.5 degrees. There's only one pathway that the IPCC identified that holds to 1.5 degrees, and it requires most of the heavy lifting to be done before 2030. Therefore, I also find it worrying that the minister and many Liberal MPs persistently say in the House that there's nothing that we agreed to in Paris that required that we work in 5-year increments starting in 2025. There is indeed in the Paris Agreement the commitment to 2023 being the first global stocktake, and paragraph 24 of the COP21 decision document which said Canada should have improved our target in 2020, and every 5 years thereafter. So how is it that the department has advised the minister that C12, with a first milestone year in 2030, is not completely inconsistent with what we agreed to do in Paris?
Well, we didn't advise the minister that that these acts that in the way that you just described. So we're aware, and I can assure you that the minister is aware that, first of all, that the Paris Agreement contains commitments to strengthen for parties to strengthen their NDCs over time, starting in the 2020s, and the minister is also aware that there is not just one goal that needs to be achieved with respect to in order to achieve the desired outcome of avoiding a temperature increase greater than 1.5. He's fully aware of that.
Sorry.
And my time's up. Hey, I mean, I cited the specific section, John. You know that it's specifically 2020, not in the 2020s. But I think I've run out of time and probably the chair's patience.
No. But yes, you run out of time. Not patience, but time. Mr. Longfield will be splitting with Mr. Saini again, I believe.
Actually, no, Mr. Biddle is up now.
Okay, okay, well, I'm sorry, I don't. Okay, well, Mr. Biddle, go ahead.
I appreciate that. Perhaps Mr. Longfield gave it to Mr. Saini, who's now giving it to me. So I'm happy to take the floor and make it as complicated as possible for you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that your patience wasn't undone completely, and there was some left over. But we know as our caucus chair, you have ample patience dealing with us, and we appreciate it. So to the officials, to help us grasp the current environment of government accountability with regards to climate, could you explain, please, what climate reporting obligations currently exist at the federal level, and give us a glimpse of the incoming reports?
I think probably the easiest way to do that would be to reiterate the minister's commitment to share with the committee a table that we've developed that identifies all of the reporting obligations that Canada as a party to the UNFCCC has. So we provide regular reports to the UNFCCC, both about past emissions performance and future projections, disaggregated across the various sources that are specified under the UNFCCC. We will be supplementing those obligations that already exist and that are already undertaken with the obligations to set a target, to develop a plan, to issue progress reports, and to issue assessment reports, and then to, in addition to that, work on the part of the government to retain and respond to ongoing advice from the advisory committee, and to have the Commissioner on Environment and Sustainable Development to conduct regular reviews of each period.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I think there's a point of order.
Je m'excuse, juste un rappel au règlement.
Oui.
Oui, yes, every time Mr. Moffat speaks, the interpreter has trouble hearing him. I think the microphone might be too close to his mouth, Mr. Moffat. I wonder if you have a microphone?
But I'm happy to make adjustments if needed.
Are we good, Madam Clerk? Are we good? Are the interpreters okay with Mr. Moffat's sound?
Do you want me to adjust the location of my mic?
I hear you. You sound good to me, but why don't you continue? But I may interrupt if we need to make some adjustments.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Coming back to the bill, which C12 introduces new reporting requirements on the government between now and 2030. Could you expand on those, and how would they be integrated into the existing reporting obligations, given I appreciate your previous answer as well, but if you could expand on a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
Well, under the bill, we'll be required to formalize the target for, first of all, to formalize the target for 2030, and then to provide a plan to achieve that target. And as the minister explained, that plan will include considerable detail, which consistent with existing plans and existing reporting to the UNFCCC will, as, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of the member, already indicated, will include projected emission reductions in the form of a trajectory from present to 2030 and beyond. And then there will be an obligation for a formal progress report 2 years before 2030.
Okay, thank you so much. There are new obligations, or sorry, B12 or B12. It's a vitamin. C12 would put obligations on the Minister of Finance to put together reports disclosing the risk and opportunities of climate change at the federal level. Can I ask officials to explain what those reports would look like, and what do they mean by risks and opportunities as mentioned in section 23?
Pretty briefly, please.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. The risks and opportunities phrase is a phrase used in many of the international standards around climate-related risks. And so the government would intend to develop a report that's suitable to the federal government and the public administration, federal public administration, to match the best practices that are seen internationally. You'll note in the most recent budget, the government has committed to adopt the task force for climate-related financial disclosures for large crown corporations by 2022 and for smaller crown corporations by 2024. So okay. This measure complements those existing commitments.
Merci, Madame Michaud. À vous la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour.
Thank you. I would like to get back to the target that is going to be included in the bill. That is a reduction of 40 to 45%. I was asking that question of the minister a little earlier. I didn't know whether there was a gap between what was announced and the target that was announced by the government. If we follow the current trajectory, what are going to be the GHG emissions in 2013? And I'm looking for the number in megatons.
Un sous-ministre qui aurait la réponse à cette question ici.
The deputy minister who might have that answer. I was wondering whether you have the figures in front of you. And if you don't, you can send them to the company later. Otherwise, I'll just move on to a second question. Yes, go ahead. Section 11 of the bill says that the minister can modify the targets for a given year at any time. And let's say that a minister saw that Canada was not going to achieve its goals, then he could lower them. In other words, if the minister sees a failure coming, he can adjust the targets rather than the measures and action plan. Is my interpretation of that correct? Who is going to answer that question? Will it be Mr. Moffat?
As I understand it, the minister has the right to change the targets, but does he also have a right to change the plan, or can he? C'est bien ça votre question, Madame Michaud?
Oui, est-ce qu'il y a...
Is that your question? Was it misinterpreted? Because I just have 2.5 minutes. No, there wasn't a problem. I just don't know who wants to answer that question. Mr. Moffat? Mr. Nevison?
Oui, le ministre a indiqué que
Yes. The minister indicated that our target will be aligned with our NDC under the Paris Agreement.
countries' targets cannot go backwards, cannot be weakened.
Je suis pas certaine de comprendre, Monsieur Moffett.
I'm not sure that I understood what you said. In Section 11, it says that the minister can modify the target that was set. So if you take into account that the minister said earlier that the target of 40 to 45% will be the target for 2030, it means that at any point he can decide to change that target. Is that correct? Answer, yes, it is true that Section 11 gives that power to the minister. He or she can change the target. But you must be aware that Canada and the minister must respect the Paris Accord.
There is a requirement that targets be set respecting Canada's international commitments with respect to climate change, which, as I said earlier, require countries to make their ambition increasingly ambitious and not less ambitious over time.
Alors, l'article 11 pourrait permettre au ministre, par exemple.
So Section 11 could make the minister reduce the target from 40% to 30% because, let's say, the 30% target was in the Paris Accord. No. Canada is going to have a new CDN in the coming months, or rather, a new NDC in the coming months, and that will reflect the 40 to 45%.
Yes, we could set a target at 40, but for whatever reason, the minister or the government could say, well, you know what, it really needs to be 38, as long as we don't go below 30. Is that my understanding?
Yep, I understand that's the question, but the answer is no.
No?
Our NDC, it can't go below our NDC, and our NDC is going to change. Our NDC is going to increase
because of the change that we've made, we are now committing internationally to something new.
To a new NDC, which the government intends to announce this summer.
Got it. Okay. Okay, merci, Madame Michaud. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to pick up on the topic of enforcement. And we heard the minister say that the intention, or his intention, is for C12 to force future governments to meet the targets. But we know from previous court cases that certain phrases or certain clauses in the legislation can make that nearly impossible. You put in a clause about other considerations, or Mr. Albus's favorite word, balance, and all of a sudden it simply doesn't have the teeth that it needs to stand up to any sort of a legal challenge. Has the department conducted any sort of internal analysis around the enforceability, the legal enforceability of the Act?
I think, as Minister Wilkinson explained, the focus of the legislation is on political and public accountability. So there is a legal obligation on the minister of the day to set targets and to report on, to develop a plan, to report on progress towards the target, and to account for whether or not the target has been met. As such, the primary mechanism or means by which the Act will be respected over time will be public, political, and parliamentary accountability.
So legal accountability is not part of the focus of this legislation, if I understand correctly?
Well, the minister will have very clear obligations. So I would imagine that there will be clear legal obligations on the part of the minister. But those, I think it's important to appreciate that those are different than the ability to enforce a target per se.
Right. I know in other jurisdictions, such as France, I believe, the government has been taken to task through legal channels, and various parties have been successful, and the courts have forced the government to modify their approach. I know there are people who are looking at this legislation and hoping that it would provide a framework to do just that. And in fact, we have a Liberal member of Parliament saying in the House that it's his hope as well that it will provide the evidentiary basis for such legal challenges. I'm just trying to get a sense of whether the department has considered that and whether there's any analysis around whether this legislation as it's currently written would stand up to such a challenge.
Very briefly, please.
I think we anticipate that there would be an opportunity for judicial review if the minister of the day does not comply with one of the very specific obligations imposed on the minister.
Thank you. Is it Ms. McLeod next? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. McLeod.
Thank you. So as I go through the legislative summary, what I'm seeing is setting targets. Well, I mean, we've been setting targets for years. We're going to publish an assessment. We've been publishing assessments for years. We publish progress. So really, from what I can see, this is really a piece of process legislation of work that has been done by in EEEC already. Would that be accurate? But it is now formalized.
I think many of the measures in the bill have reflect actions that have been taken. What the bill does is consolidate those actions, including obligations that and steps that we take under the UNFCCC, but adds a considerable amount of accountability with respect to the obligation to set targets on a rolling 5-year basis that are consistent with net zero by 2050, and the way in which the various reports have to reflect progress towards, and if targets have not been achieved, what changes would be made, and then also directly links the CESD into this scheme.
So as I say, it's sort of process that, certainly I've seen unfolding for many years, where we're hearing the different targets, we hear the commitments that are made, but with the minister being able to change targets, and so I guess I'm not sure that what we've done here is create anything that's really going to move us in the path that the commitment is. But I'm going to shift tracks here right now. Now, this current government has committed to the UN Declaration and C19. So can you tell me what consultation process did you have with the Indigenous communities throughout Canada before you tabled this bill?
We did not engage in extensive formal consultation about the specific provisions in this bill.
Okay. Because the legislation that this government's committed to that's going through Parliament right now, and there's nothing that precluded them to act in good faith, it commits them to any piece of legislation that is significantly going to affect First Nations peoples, Indigenous peoples in Canada, need good and due process. So what I'm hearing is that there was no Indigenous process. So we have a government that's committing to the UN Declaration, but even in important bills, it really is very symbolic only, because there has been no proper process with Indigenous Canadians.
Well, I would take exception to that characterization. Since 2016, this government has engaged significantly and regularly with Indigenous peoples, including in the development of the Pan-Canadian Framework, via distinction-based processes with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, via generation energy, so there's been extensive discussions, and there continue to be discussions with Indigenous peoples around our this government's climate planning, target setting, and actions, including actions that create potential impacts on rights and traditional activities of our Indigenous people.
Yeah, but section number 19 under the UN Declaration creates very specific obligations of the government. And from what I'm hearing, there was no process. So it is not law yet, but I think it is interesting that the government is moving in a process, but they are not actually abiding by their own commitments in terms of what will that process be. Anyway, I think, like some of the other members have articulated here, you have, this is a process piece of legislation. I'm not necessarily convinced it's going to be the product that actually creates the outcome that the government has expressed. And I think, certainly the best sort of cartoon that I ever saw was a picture of a high jump bar raising higher and higher, and the government moving it higher and higher without any plan and or process. But it looks good for the public. So thank you.
Noted. So we go now to our last question for this panel. Is it Mr. Longfield?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you to the officials for being around for more detailed questions. Mine has maybe a bit more of a reflection on what Mr. Bachrach was suggesting around legal challenges. And I'm wondering about, as we create the targets and we're working on goals, how we work with the other orders of government, and including the Indigenous communities, to ensure that the goals are going to be met, and that we're doing this together with our provincial, territorial, and Indigenous partners. Could you describe what that process has been up till now, and what it would look like going forward?
So I think that's an excellent question, and an excellent and a really important issue, and it's one that where we need to distinguish the specific legal obligations under this bill and the process that the government and future governments will follow in order to make really effective, drive really effective action on climate change. So this bill requires the federal government to set targets. It also requires the government or the minister to consult broadly, including via an advisory committee. Related to, but not specifically, and the bill also requires enables the minister to the minister's plan to refer to actions of other levels of government, but does not require that. And that's because, of course, the federal government cannot compel provinces, territories, or Indigenous governments to do something on their own, but can encourage them. So the degree to which any government, current or future, does that will, of course, influence the overall effectiveness of the plan. At the moment, we have a highly engaged process of engagement with federal, provincial, territorial, municipal, Indigenous governments, as well as with a wide range of stakeholders in developing individual measures, in rolling out the design of individual measures, in identifying opportunities for collaboration at a regional, provincial, or local level, as well as very formal distinctions-based processes that have been in place for a number of years with our Indigenous partners.
Thank you. And as you're describing that, I'm thinking of the recent Supreme Court ruling to say that this is within federal jurisdiction, but also working with the partners. I think they've clarified that this is the path that we would need to follow, and that we are following that path. We've heard a bit of discussion about the advisory boards, the nature of advisory boards, volunteers that are helping the government in different portfolios. I know we have them in that help with the preparation of the budget. We have them on jobs and export development. We've got different types of advisory boards working with ministers. This legislation would take that to a different level from what you were saying earlier with the order in council process. What's the timing and what's the selection that's done through the order in council process? And when would we see that take effect, assuming the legislation was able to pass by the end of June?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll respond to that one. When the bill comes into force, that is when the governor and council process would start to apply to members of the Net Zero Advisory Body. The remuneration would be set, would be fixed at a level by the governor and council. The governor and council appointee process is an open and transparent process, and that would start to apply to the advisory body as well.
So the existing members could apply, but other people could apply as well.
That is correct.
Okay, and then the independent review of the governor and council application process is done outside of government and then comes back to cabinet. Is that how it works?
I'm not an expert on the governor and council appointment process.
Okay, that would be something for us to look at as a committee, just to confirm how that process works. Thank you very much.
Okay,
I've run out of time.
Thank you. Okay, so I just want to thank I want to thank Mr. Miller, Mr. Moffat, Mr. Nevison. We will now break for 5 minutes while the new panel witnesses connect. I'll just take a moment to mention, to remind members that we have 2 more meetings this week, 3-hour meetings with witnesses on May 19th and May 20th at 2:30, same time, same channel. And also the following week on the 26th, we'll start clause by clause. So I'm asking that amendments be submitted by Friday, May 21st at 5 p.m., no later. And the next week, it looks like we only have 2 meetings of 2 hours. That's all we could get under the circumstances. And we'll, hopefully maybe there'll be an extra hour we can get somewhere. But right now it looks like 4 hours over 2 meetings. But please submit your amendments by Friday, May 21st at 5 p.m. So let's take a break, Madam Clerk, and we can test the sound for the other witnesses. Thanks again to our
Mr.
3 witnesses.
Scarpaleggia?
Yes.
Could I just, I was asked it's John Moffat. I was asked a question about exactly what the target of 40 to 45% would represent. And the answer is 438 to 401 megatons.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, thank you to our witnesses, and we'll be reconnecting, or we can go on mute and stop our cameras, but only for 5 minutes, please. Thank you. statements of 5 minutes each. We'll start with Ms. McLeod, who mentioned she's an articling student at Miller Thompson. So, Ms. McLeod, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Christy McLeod, and I'm calling in from the unceded ancestral traditional lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Nations in the city of Vancouver. As mentioned, I am an articling student at Miller Thompson LLP, and I have a master's degree in environmental studies, which focused on Canadian climate accountability. I have authored and submitted a brief, which 179 young individuals and 11 youth-led organizations signed on to. I am also a co-author of the brief submitted by the national group Lawyers for Climate Justice. My generation and the generations to follow will bear the brunt of the climate crisis in the coming decades. It is our future that will be shaped by the strength or weakness of climate accountability laws that we pass now. The Canadian government has recognized the climate emergency, yet it continues to faithfully subsidize the industry most responsible for fueling climate change. Canada's projected oil and gas expansion from now to 2050 will consume a staggering 16% of the world's carbon budget in a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. We have tried maintaining business as usual, but it has failed. Since setting its first target in 1992, Canada's emissions have increased by a net 16%. Our emissions in 2019 were higher than when the Liberal government took office in 2015. We can and we must do better. I understand the challenges that politicians face in addressing the climate crisis. The benefits of climate action emerge over time, while our election cycles focus on the short term. As our futures are at stake, however, it is critical that climate efforts not be politicized and that Canada's accountability legislation contains sufficient measures to ensure the government meets its climate obligations. I am frightened by the lack of urgency and accountability presently in the bill. Bill C-12's focus is on achieving net zero emissions by 2050. The target set by the minister for each milestone year is to look towards achieving the 2050 target. We need to ensure that our focus is first, doing as much as we possibly can by 2030, and then looking towards 2040 and 2050. We cannot leave the brunt of the effort to be tackled in the distant future. As the bill presently stands, Canada's first milestone year is 2030, which means that the minister's first progress report would not occur until 2028. We should not have to wait that long to receive an update on the progress made towards Canada's targets. By amending Section 2 to include the year 2025 as a milestone year, the minister would be obligated to prepare a progress report in 2023, which is a much more appropriate timeline. Under subsection 7.4, each target must be set a mere 5 years in advance. And under section 10, Canada is only required to create an emissions reduction plan, which contains key reduction measures and strategies, as opposed to a robust plan of how the target will be reached. The stakes are simply too high for us to draw our map to net zero while already en route. Young people deserve to know what Canada's plan is to address this emergency and secure a better future. Those working in industries and markets want to know Canada's plan to get to net zero so that they can respond and adapt. When Teck Resources withdrew its federal application for the Frontier Oil Sands project, they noted that industry values jurisdictions with frameworks that reconcile resource development and climate change, and that this was lacking in Canada. The international community also deserves to know what Canada's plan is. Canada is responsible for 1.7 to 1.8% of all the emissions in our atmosphere. And in 2018, Canada was the 11th highest emitting state globally and the 5th highest per capita. Our country's actions have and will continue to play a pivotal role in the global race to reduce emissions and address the climate emergency. A target that represents Canada's fair share of the global mitigation burden would have to be an estimated 56% to 153% below 2005 levels, which is significantly more than the 40 to 45% range enshrined in Canada's new target. I urge the committee to ensure that Canada follow its peers and set bold targets that begin to approach our fair share of mitigation and puts forward a credible plan that ensures we can reach these goals. As young people, our future hangs in the balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nous passons maintenant au Dr. Claudel Pétrin-Desrosiers.
We'll move on now to Dr. Claudel Pétrin-Desrosiers, a resident physician and president of the Association Québécoise des Médecins pour l'Environnement. 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us today. My name is Claudel Pétrin-Desrosiers, president of the AQME, also a member of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. I'm accompanied today by Dr. Courtney Howard, emergency physician and located in Yellowknife. WHO has recognized climate change as one of the most serious health challenges of the century. It aggravates asthma and other pollutions because of forest fires. It increases the death rate due to morbidity of heat waves. It causes food impacts and accelerates Lyme disease, for example, and new pandemics. Impacts are being felt unequally, particularly in Canada's far north, by women, children, racialized individuals, and Indigenous people. Many deaths could be prevented if we were to reduce our use of fossil fuels. The association has indicated that improving air quality could save many thousands of lives in Canada, 15,300 in Canada. In my daily life, I'm a family physician. I treat children, from children to geriatric patients. However, there's no miracle cure. We have to ensure that the state accepts responsibility and accountability for climate change. We should probably follow the United Kingdom example. For example, they have binding carbon budgets, which they established in 2008. It's a public health network, and they were able, for their National Health Service, decrease emissions by 18.5% by rationalizing a lot of their clinical practice. In the UK, a health expert advisory council was integrated into the reports to Parliament. The objective was to adopt best practices in order to protect public health, looking at practices that have co-benefits, the quality of air, transport system that promotes chronic disease-reducing active travel, sustainable, resilient, and healthy food systems. Our CAPE program supports a number of these issues that have been tried internationally. There are 3 important points we'd like to raise. First, establishing a climate accountability framework, then national climate targets, and the creation of air emission reduction plans and reports on its progress. However, there's a number of shortages in the present bill that hinders it from protecting the most vulnerable and the aged. 3 aspects of accountability are required. A 2025 emission target as a milestone year. We should have a baseline so that we can start to adapt our calculations and analyses and our progress so that we can reach the target in 2050. Secondly, we need an independent body of scientific experts, which would include health experts with their own secretariat and their own climate modeling ability to report to Parliament, not the Minister of the Environment. Explicit and also be able to comment or criticize without any fear of reprisal any policies or action plans. And thirdly, the new bill should have explicit alignment with the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Individuals, which is severely impacted by any climate change, and we have to systematically align with their needs. Climate change is the biggest threat to our society and our health in this century. We have to ensure that we explore this opportunity here in Canada and around the world. This is why the Paris Agreement is seen as the most important public health treaty in the world. We have to do this for our parents, our family, and our children. Thank you very much. And we also welcome Dr. Courtney Howard, who is accompanying you from CAPE, Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. We'll now move on to Dr. Reynold Bergen, Science Director
of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Dr. Bergen.
Okay, do we know whether Fawn's going to be able to present, or is it just going to be me?
Well, if we haven't fixed the mic issues, it'll just be yourself.
Okay,
now.
Well, I will start rolling through, and then I'll let Fawn jump in if she wants to. Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm Reynold. I'm the Science Director with the Beef Cattle Research Council, and my silent collaborator is Fawn Jackson, who's the Director of Policy with the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Now, the CCA represents 60,000 beef producers in Canada, and the beef industry contributes $21.8 billion to Canada's GDP and supports 348,000 full-time jobs. And 50% of Canada's beef is exported around the globe. Now, the beef industry is a hidden gem when it comes to Canada's environment. Beef production is one of the best tools that Canada has to reach our shared conservation and climate change goals. When we talk about net zero emissions, it's important to recognize where beef production fits into Canada's climate change picture. The emission intensity of Canadian beef is about half the global average, and we're continuing to improve. Our per kilogram greenhouse gas footprint dropped by 15% between 1981 and 2011, and that happened because Canada is a world leader in research and because Canada's farmers and ranchers are adopting the improved animal and plant health, nutrition, and genetics practices and technologies that research generates. Reducing consumption of Canadian beef would be detrimental to Canada's net zero emission goals, and here's why. Beef contributes 2.4% to Canada's total emissions. But emissions are only one side of the carbon ledger. The other side of the ledger is the soil carbon that's stored in grasslands. Canada's ranchers steward 44 million acres of grasslands, which are a stable store of 1.5 billion tons of carbon. Reducing beef production and consumption would mean that privately owned grasslands would be converted to other agricultural uses. Cultivating Canada's remaining grasslands would release much more soil carbon into the atmosphere than we would ever save from reduced cattle emissions. This risk is real. Canada lost 5 million acres of grasslands in the early 2000s when beef producers faced tough economic times. Now, to further improve the net greenhouse gas footprint of Canadian beef, we need to tackle three key challenges. The first is to further reduce our emissions per kilogram of Canadian beef. Our industry's goal is to reduce Canadian beef emissions intensity by another 33% by 2030. Achieving this will require continued advancements in genetics, animal health management, and nutrition. And Canadian researchers are also investigating nutritional supplements for cattle that could significantly accelerate those improvements. The second challenge is to further increase carbon sequestration on grasslands. Our industry's goal is to sequester an additional 3.4 million tons of carbon every year. This will require research to develop more productive plant varieties and to identify forage and grazing management practices that increase productivity and carbon sequestration. We will also need to support producer adoption of these beneficial practices. Now, the third challenge is to protect the large and stable store of carbon in Canada's grasslands. Canada's beef industry has a goal to maintain and protect the 44 million acres of grasslands that are under our care. We've already lost 80% of our natural grasslands, and the Worldwide Fund for Wildlife's 2020 Plowprint report found that the Great Plains are continuing to be lost at a rate of 4 football fields every minute. We're working very closely and collaboratively with the conservation organizations and the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef to protect these grasslands. But we worry that these efforts will not be enough. The biggest unknown is how a myriad of government policies such as offset protocols, clean fuel regulations, and significant investments in irrigation are going to drive land use change on top of record high crop prices. We need thoughtful deliberation to avoid policies that drive irreparable damage to this grassland ecosystem and its significant carbon stores. We give this detail on Canada's beef industry because it emphasizes why, in regard to Bill C-12, our key ask is that holistic policy analysis be done to understand the potential unintended negative consequences of well-intended environmental policies. We also ask that experts from Canada's beef industry be included in advisory roles under the Act to ensure the best analysis and policies to support net zero emissions are developed. We look forward to being partners in this work towards net zero emissions in Canada, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Bergen, and we welcome, of course, Fawn Jackson as well from the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. We go now to Eco-Justice, Alan Andrews, Climate Change Program Director, for opening remarks.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm Alan Andrews, the Climate Director at Eco-Justice, where I lead our program of law reform and litigation aimed at securing climate. I'm joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations in Vancouver, BC. I'm a qualified lawyer in both Canada and in England and Wales. And prior to joining Eco-Justice, I practiced environmental law in the UK and EU, where I focused on holding governments to account for missing pollution targets and advocating for stronger laws so that I didn't need to. Eco-Justice is pleased to see Canada aiming to join the growing number of countries who have adopted this type of climate law, which has really become a standard tool worldwide to ensure governments meet their climate commitments and are increasingly viewed as essential to the transition to a low carbon economy. Eco-Justice has made joint written submissions with West Coast Environmental Law and a number of other organizations. Given time constraints, I will focus on one of the key themes in those submissions, and that's the obligation on the minister to prepare emission reduction plans. This is the foundation of the accountability framework that Bill C-12 establishes. These plans are where the real action and accountability stems from. Unfortunately, as I will explain, that foundation is at the moment rather shaky, so strengthening those provisions will be the key to the success of Bill C-12. If you fail to plan...
Une chose, s'il vous plaît, si vous me permettez de vous interrompre, je suis désolée.
Allez-y.
C'est qu'il n'y a plus aucune traduction parce que le son n'est pas bon.
Depuis quand qu'il n'y a pas de traduction?
Depuis que pratiquement
commencé. Monsieur Andrews. Madam Clerk, is there a problem with it? Is it a technical problem or is it a problem with the mic?
Hello, this is the interpreter speaking. I'm not sure if you can hear me on the English channel. Could we ask the witness to maybe put his mic a little further away from his mouth? I can try that, but right now it's very muffled.
Apparently it's a problem with the particular brand of the microphone because all of the stats that we're getting are good. So I guess the issue would be just to try to speak slowly and clearly, Mr. Andrews.
Okay. Yeah, so that'd be great. And maybe move the mic a bit further away from your mouth. I find that always helps. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll do my best to talk clearly. So I'm going to focus on the emission reduction plans, which I've explained is really the key to success of Bill C-12. And that's because if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And too often Canada has failed to meet climate targets because it has not had a credible and detailed plan for achieving them. Too often we see climate plans that are really just a glossy marketing brochure with no real detail or substance. A credible plan must do three things. One, it must explain how much carbon pollution needs to decline in order to meet the targets. Two, it must set out the policies that will close that gap. And three, it must explain who is going to implement those policies and when. The plan must be detailed enough that the public, Parliament, and civil society can determine whether it is credible or whether it's overly optimistic and likely to fail. As drafted, unfortunately, Bill C-12 does not require plans that meet that standard. Sections 9 and 10 are the relevant provisions of the bill. Section 9 requires the minister to prepare a plan for achieving the net zero 2050 target and each of the 5-year milestone targets. Section 10 then prescribes the information that a plan must contain. But Section 10 is very light in terms of the specific details that plans must contain. So there's a real risk of the glossy brochure type of plan that we so desperately need to move beyond. For example, Section 10 does not explicitly require that the plan explain how it will achieve the milestone target to which it relates. By contrast, the UK Climate Act is more explicit, establishing a clear duty on government to not only achieve the 2050 net zero target, but also to prepare policies that it considers will enable the 5-year carbon budgets under the Act to be met. Nor does Bill C-12 require projections of what impact the actions described in the plan will have on carbon emissions, and it doesn't require plans to include any details of sectoral strategies or actions by provinces and territories. So taken together as drafted, the bill would allow the government of the day to prepare an obviously deficient plan, or maybe even worse, a plan that contains so little detail that we really have no idea whether it will be adequate. So undermining the main purpose of the bill, which is to ensure accountability for the achievement of climate targets through transparency. Fortunately, some simple amendments to Section 10 would significantly improve the bill. First, the bill needs to make clear that the plan must demonstrate how it will achieve the relevant milestone targets. Second, it must require the minister to show how the action being proposed adds up, ton by ton, year by year, to the cuts in pollution needed to reach the next milestone targets. This will require projections based on evidence of what the plan is expected to achieve. And then third, the plan must describe...
I'm told there's no interpretation again. Is this Madame Posé, c'est vrai qu'il n'y a pas d'interprétation? Et on ne connaît pas la raison, Madame Greffière. C'est un problème de micro ou problème technique au niveau de...
Oui, c'est la sorte de micro qui fonctionne mal avec le système qu'on a.
Okay. Well, we'll have to, I think we have no interpretation, so we'll have to stop there, Mr. Andrews, and we'll go now to Mr. Gage from the West Coast Environmental Law Association for 5 minutes.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today from the territory. From the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people in Victoria, BC. I'm the head of West Coast Environmental.
Do we have interpretation? Is it, Madame Clerk, Monique, vous avez l'interprétation? Okay, allez-y. Go ahead, Mr. Gage. I would move the mic up a bit, though. It's even I find, yeah.
Like that?
Further, yeah, higher maybe. Yeah,
I'm
that's
the
good.
head of West Coast Environmental Law's climate program, the author of several reports and submissions on Canadian climate law, and a member, as Alan mentioned, of a coalition of organizations that really want Bill C-12 to be a real climate change accountability law. In 1992, under Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, Canada played a leadership role in negotiating the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the governments of the world agreed to, quote, stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations and prevent dangerous anthropocentric interference with the climate system. In 1992, I still had a full head of hair. I've waited my entire adult life for Canada to deliver. Canada set specific targets in 1997 under Prime Minister Chrétien and in 2010 under Prime Minister Harper, but as a country, we continue to miss every climate target set. My daughter at age 15 is now organizing climate strikes, worried about her future. The challenge is that climate change just doesn't follow election cycles. Too often, governments claim credit for setting targets and then push off the work and ignore the difficult choices necessary to meet those targets. We need accountability. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, accountability is the quality or state of being accountable, especially an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. At their core, climate accountability laws insulate climate policy from the election cycle by making each administration accountable for keeping the government on track to achieve both short and medium-term climate targets. Bill C-12 fails in a number of respects. First, as drafted, and as Alan noted, the sections 9 and 10 don't clearly require the minister to show how the government will achieve, how the country will achieve its climate targets that have been set by the government. Rather, the minister is required to identify measures and strategies that the federal government intends to take that will contribute to achieving the 2050 target. Secondly, because C-12 sets only one target as a time, initially a midterm target of 2030, and then short-term targets of 5 years each thereafter, it never requires governments to consider both short and midterm action at the same time or to be held accountable on both time scales. In generally, international climate accountability laws achieve that short and midterm target through rolling short-term targets that together plot a path to one midterm target further down the road. For example, UK's Climate Change Act, when it was enacted in 2008, established 3 targets known as carbon budgets covering the next 15 years. When the first budget was finished, a new budget extending out to 2027 was established, and so on. And we're now expecting the 6th budget extending to 2037 in July of this year. Each UK government is therefore accountable both for achieving a target within the next 5 years, but also for putting in place measures that will help achieve the future targets further out. By setting a first target for 2030, with the first progress report not till 2027 and 28, C-12 invites cynical claims that it creates accountability for only future governments. The post-2030 targets set just 5 years at a time are equally problematic. 5 years is simply not enough to roll out new programs, see them deliver significant emissions reductions, and get the results we're looking for, nor does a single 5-year target give an administration an incentive to look beyond those 5 years and put in place the measures that will help future governments achieve their 5-year targets. Here's what we need from C-12. Rolling 5-year milestone targets, not one target at a time, supplemented by robust plans set at least 10 years apart, preferably 15, or ahead, preferably 15. For example, in 2025, a target for 2035 should be set, and a new 10-year plan would then update the second half of the existing plan and incorporate new measures to extend the roadmap out to 2035. Second, we need to require immediate action, ideally by setting a 2025 target reflecting the expected emissions reductions from Canada's climate plan, or alternatively, simply requiring all plans to identify emissions reductions for each year covered by the plan. Third, frequent and earlier progress reports, much more often than every 5 years, ideally annually, and starting by 2023 at the latest. And as Alan mentioned, plans that actually set out a roadmap to achieving the milestone targets are key. And it's impossible to separate these aspects of accountability from the other important requirements that my co-panelists have already mentioned and which are referred to in our submissions. Despite its name, C-12 does not yet deliver on the promise of climate accountability. We hope that you will make the amendments necessary to bring it up to where it needs to be.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we go to our first round of questions. I have Mr. Generou, Mr. Saini, Madame Michaud, Mr. Bachrach. If that's not correct, let me know when the time comes. But are you leading off, Mr. Generou?
I sure am, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks for checking. Yeah, thank you everybody for putting together your presentations. I know it's not easy to come before committee here like this, but again, appreciate you taking the time today. I'd like to go to Dr. Bergen. I was actually quite, I had some questions for you at the start, but then as you were going through your presentation, I was quite blown away at some of the information that you shared and some of the work that the Cattlemen's Association's already doing. You started talking a little bit about the uses of research and development and how some of this work has already impacted the environment. Hoping that you can expand on maybe some acute examples of that we can share with the committee. Also open it up, obviously, to Fawn if she's able with her headset now.
Certainly. Thanks for the question. So the first thing I'd point out is that I'd mentioned earlier that over a 30-year period, we managed to reduce our emissions per kilogram of beef by 15%. That was between 1981 and 2011. And those dates are important because that was before the beef industry really started to pay very specific attention to the environment. It was always understood that the environment was important because so many of these are intergenerational farms, and you're not going to keep these things going if you're not taking care of the environment you're living and working in. So those improvements, and this is getting to the research point, those improvements happen because of steady incremental improvements in plant breeding, in animal nutrition, animal health, and so on. And all of those things stack up together to improve not only animal production efficiency and productivity, but they also reduce emissions. Now, in order to move forward, we need to do two things. And one is continue those investments in the steady, slow, incremental things that have generated those improvements and will continue to, but also invest in some of these more novel things that are very specifically environmentally focused. And so a couple of examples, the ones that I mentioned actually were nutritional supplements. And there's a few of them. Some of them are kind of mundane, just simple dietary things. You know, feeding distillers grains that are left over from biofuel production have been shown to reduce emissions by 5%. You know, there's a number of other more novel ones like biochar and algae and lemongrass and sprouted barley and whatnot. Those are I would say unproven. They've certainly been investigated in the lab, but before you know whether they're effective in cattle, you need to do large-scale feeding trials. Those haven't been done yet, right? And that's important because if cows don't eat it, you're not going to get the benefit. But there's a couple of those new additives that have been tested and are showing promise. Probably the most promising one is a product called 3NOP, which is developed by a Dutch company called Royal DSM. That product name is Bovaer. But the point with this one is that feed additive can reduce emissions by 20 to 70% in feedlot diets. And that's not lab stuff, that's not modeling, that's work that's been done in large scale commercial feedlot trials.
That was one I was hoping that you'd talk about. Sorry to cut you off, Dr. Bergen. I just have a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Because from what I understand, it's yet to be approved by the government, and you're welcome to get into that, but won't dwell on that at this particular point. But if we could tie it back to C12, what are then with all of the research and development and really the leading way that the Cattlemen Association has been going forward on the environment? What are some of those reservations then that you have with C12? Do you think the bill does it balance the GHG emission goals with economic factors fairly?
Well, I think I'll talk a little bit more about that product, and then I'll throw it over to Fawn for the specific issues around C12. But yes, this product hasn't been approved, and that's not a C12 issue, but it is a regulatory issue in that Canada has a veterinary drug approval process for things that go in feed and things that are for animal health, but they do not have a regulatory path for products that are specifically designed for environmental improvements. So that's not what you asked, but I'll let Fawn answer what you did.
Yeah, on C12, I guess.
Excuse me. Are we getting translation? It's still even. I'm having trouble because of the mic. But could you speak just a little bit, Ms. Jackson, and we'll see if we're getting translation. And I would speak maybe more softly if you can, because it is quite. It reverberates a bit.
Okay, on C12, what we want to make sure is that there's holistic policy analysis done and folks from the agriculture community there to understand and advise on it.
On the advisory panel piece, then is that what you mean, Ms. Jackson, or is it more broader in terms of where C12 kind of pins the cattlemen ranchers into a bit of a hole, if you will?
Yeah, certainly on the advisory council, we would want to see folks from the agriculture sector being represented there, so that when we charge forward on initiatives for climate change, that we're considering all of the different factors that could impact both the environment, but also, of course, the economy.
Okay, merci. Alors, on passe maintenant à Monsieur Saini.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming today. It's great to have all of you. Being a pharmacist, I wanted to take more of a health aspect to certain issues. And I know Dr. Petrin Desrosiers and Dr. Howard, you're both physicians. So can you describe to all of us the health and the health system impacts of climate change if we continue along the current emissions pathway?
Me? Hi, thanks. Yes, so I am speaking to you from a house in Yellowknives Dene territory that is atop permafrost. So this part of the world is already 2.5 degrees Celsius warmer than it was when an 80-year-old elder was born. We're deep into adaptation. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on our foundation here to try to keep it from sliding down into Great Slave Lake. And in 2014, we had, in fact, 2.5 months of wildfire smoke. And that ringed Yellowknife. It didn't really even matter which way the wind was blowing, because there was a fire in almost every direction. So we published a study in the British Medical Journal Open just recently showing that, in fact, we had a full doubling of emergency department visits for asthma over the course of that time. And we did community-based interviews and asked people, okay, so how did it feel to live in smoke for that long? And we got all sorts of answers, like we felt isolated, we felt anxious, we didn't have enough physical activity, we felt disconnected from the land, and it made us really worry about what climate change means for our children. And so I'm sort of a voice from the future in a way, because as Minister Wilkinson pointed out earlier, the North is warming at triple the global rate. So what we need to know is that we're going to get worse until mid-century. Since I've done the wildfire research, I often get the question from media, so Dr. Howard, is this a new normal? And I have to say, no, it's not. It's going to get worse. So we need to prepare our hospitals for the adaptation that's already built in. So the Canada's Changing Climate Report produced by Environment and Climate Change Canada showed that we will continue to warm until at least the 1940s, or sorry, the 2140s. And so that's when our kids are only going to be, a child born today will only be in their 20s. We need to make sure our hospitals have adequate ventilation. We actually had to close our operating room for part of that summer because it was filled with smoke and we couldn't operate. And from having presented with some architects at a national architecture conference, we did an audience poll, and only about 40% of the audience was taking future projections in terms of precipitation and heat into account as they built the buildings of the future. So we see from COVID that, not preparing for something does not protect you when it happens. So even to just adapt to what we're already facing, we're going to see we have a lot to do.
I just want to give Dr. Desrosiers a chance if she wants to add something.
Ouais, je vais rajouter un point.
I just want to add one point. In Quebec,
we'll see in Canada are heat waves. These heat waves, we've seen what can be awaiting us, but the health authorities in Quebec calculated a few years ago it would cost 20,000 lives over the next 50 years. That's a lot. But where? Well, mostly in urban conglomerates where people who are perhaps vulnerable, but they also happen to be in heat zones and aggravate.
These 20,000 people who have died from the heat waves in Quebec, these are due to the heat waves, and there are going to be a lot of changes. And a recent report from Health Canada said that there were 15,315 people who died in 2016 from climate-related factors, and that cost thousands of dollars to the economy. And as soon as we do studies, we know that climate change has had severe effects on many parts of the body. There's a Harvard study that showed that the changes are represents 18% of deaths throughout the world because of the consequences of atmospheric pollution. Those are figures that worry us a lot. There isn't one magic bullet, and it is extremely important to have a climate plan that looks at the emissions and improves air quality, and also looks at measures that can be taken.
A minute and 10 seconds.
Okay, so just enough. So we'll go back to Dr. Howard, I think maybe 30 seconds, and Dr. Drossier. So the second question I had was, can you explain the links between climate change, habitat change, and the risk of further pandemics of a zoonotic origin?
Sure. So
30
up
seconds
here,
less.
right.
Sorry.
So up here last year, we flew elders from around the territory
Howard,
down.
could you raise your mic a bit so it's not as directly? Yeah, perfect.
Sure. So to take a local example that can be extrapolated, last year we flew elders from around the territory down and sat around a map of the NWT and had people draw where different animals have gone in their lifetime. And we ended up with, well, the beavers used to be here and now they're here, and the fish used to be here. So essentially, most of the infectious diseases, the new ones we've had over the past several decades, have come from animals. So as habitats change, as we have further biodiversity loss and everything's moving around, we end up in the position of having animals and vectors and humans in novel proximity. And that's what puts us at risk of further zoonotic transfer events of further viruses and pandemics.
And also the melting permafrost, I think, would also release certain things. I don't have enough time to go there. That's a fascinating discussion, but thank you very much.
It's
thank
true.
You very much.
Thank you. Madame Michaud. Ou c'est Madame Posé ou Madame Michaud? Madame Posé.
Monsieur le Président, ça va être Madame Posé.
It's going to be Ms. Posé, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. All right. Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of the witnesses for coming, for taking the time to come, because the bill was tabled before Christmas, but it took quite a while to update it. And I know that it was an awful lot of work to end up where we are today. I'm going to ask some questions regarding the impacts on health. My question is for Dr. Claudel. There was a lot of talk about the physical health, but there are also major impacts on mental health. Psychological distress caused by climate change. And we're living through a pandemic right now, and obviously I have to ask a question about that. Is there a link between the pandemic, the climate change that we're seeing, and the impact on potential future pandemics? Well, yes, climate changes are quite varied. There are all sorts of things that happen. There's deforestation, overuse of land, all sorts of things. And there are changes to the habitats of all sorts of animals and insects. And we can see that human beings are more susceptible to animal-borne diseases. For example, the Ebola virus. With all of these changes that are happening very quickly, that means that there is a higher risk that those kinds of things are going to happen. It's difficult to predict the future, but we're playing Russian roulette here. We are taking unnecessary risks for our health. The WHO has seen a number of cases where climate change has led to more cases of COVID-19. With regard to your question about mental health, I'll ask my colleague, Dr. Howard, to speak to that. There are major phenomena that are related to climate change. We are losing our natural reference points. A lot of people are no longer living on their ancestral lands. There are all sorts of climate disasters, forest fires, floods, etc. There are some studies that were carried out that showed that groups that had lived through floods had greater cases of depression and anxiety. It was a traumatic shock to them. So obviously, those are questions that concern us. The young people wonder what their future is going to look like. I am part of that group, and I wonder what kind of environment will be where I raise my children. What's that going to look like? So there are a lot of studies going on by psychologists, doctors, psychiatrists to see what the impact of all these phenomena will be. And it's even more so because we've just gone through a year where a lot of people were isolated. There was a lot of talk about mental health as well. Oh, you've forgotten that Ms. Howard wants to answer. Well, you obviously know a lot, but before giving the floor to Ms. Howard, I'll ask you the following question. With climate change, what are the impacts on health that can be foreseen? So how can we improve our health systems, if you will? How can we be more careful? That's an excellent question. Climate change is changing a lot of risk factors as well. When we have heat waves, there is an increased number of visits to the emergency room. There's a huge amount of pressure on our health system. It is leading to an increased risk of heart attacks and other serious illnesses, blood clots in the brain, those types of things, aneurysms. So if you look at climate changes, extreme climate changes, events like floods and heat waves and forest fires, there will be an impact on frontline workers and in emergency rooms. If there are extreme weather events, it can really jeopardize the health system, especially if there's a hospital that's in a zone that has to be evacuated. So that is going to have a huge impact on the health system. Look at what happened in Fort McMurray in 2016-2017. About 20 health institutions had to be evacuated, and also a number of long-term care centers had to be evacuated. So that caused a lot of stress on people's health, and the healthcare system. It's clear that there's been a lot of stress last year during this pandemic. Well, listen, I want to give some time to Ms. Howard because time is flying. Obviously, we're going to need some major healthcare transfers. Ms. Howard, very quickly.
Us as doctors. So I've worked with humanitarian organizations. I had the honor of helping to produce the first brief between Doctors Without Borders and the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. We worry about the limits of adaptation. So what I'm describing is already a challenge. Like, we're already having to emergently evacuate emergency departments in a matter of hours. And we know that we're going to continue to warm until at least mid-century. And then if we continue along the high emissions pathway we're currently on, what my prior boss at the Lancet Countdown on Climate Change and Health, Dr. Nick Watts, who's now in charge of decarbonizing the National Health Service, he described that as catastrophic. What I am telling you is, as a physician, we cannot guarantee that we will be able to continue to deliver the services for health that you would expect as a citizen of a high income country through to the end of the century. And so not only is this a critical risk to the health of today's children, it is a critical risk to the health systems that they depend on.
Thank you. Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the comments we've received already from our panel. I'd like to begin with Ms. MacLeod. I thought your comments about intergenerational equity were particularly well put, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about C12 in that context, and if there was one change to C12 that you feel would best reflect that obligation we have to future generations, what would that change be?
Thank you for the question. In the youth brief that I submitted to the committee, I recommended that Section 8 of the bill be amended to require that the minister consider the responsibility of Canadians toward future generations. This is language that MP of Winnipeg Centre, Leah Gazan, she put forward in the Bill C-232, the Climate Emergency Action Act, and calls for the minister to consider the responsibilities of Canadians toward future generations in developing a climate emergency action framework. By considering the responsibility of Canadians toward not only the present generations, but also future generations, will put much at ease for people like myself who are wondering what the future looks like for our future children and future generations.
Thank you, Ms. MacLeod. Turning now to Mr. Gage and Mr. Andrews, you spoke a little bit about this in your introductory remarks, but we've seen a number of countries and subnational governments pass climate accountability legislation over the past decade. I wonder if you could expand on your opening remarks in terms of how C12 stacks up to those international examples, and specifically what improvements, and again, you noted some of these, what improvements we need to make to C12 in order for it to really reflect the international best practices in this area.
Alan, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to check if is the sound okay for the translation service?
I think so. I think if you speak slowly, it should work. Yeah.
Okay.
But not too slowly, because we only have 6 minutes.
Okay. In short, and to be frank, and I'm looking to Andrew to develop my answers, it doesn't stack up well compared to international examples. We've heard a lot about the UK. I'd also mention New Zealand as a more recent and possibly better example. Some of the key criticisms we've already heard about. I won't elaborate further on the lack of detail in plans, but that's one obvious area of improvement. Similarly, Andrew mentioned the need for a bigger runway, a bigger lead-in time between the targets being set and the plans developed. So we have the better advanced warning that allows adaptation and innovation. And then finally, I'll talk about the advisory body. There are various amendments that could be made to take the Bill C12 closer to the UK model in order to better insulate that advisory body from the political process and give it that cross-party consensus that's been so successful in the UK.
I would just refer you, I know they've come in just this morning, so I believe, or maybe it was yesterday, so I don't think they've been translated yet, but when they are available, I'll refer you to the submissions from ourselves, EcoJustice, Climate Action Network, and Equidare. We identify sort of 5 pillars: early and ambitious action, mid and long-term certainty, credible and effective plans and reports, accountability, and the science and expert advice. I think in all 5 areas, the bill does not stack up compared to what we've seen in other legislation. There's clearly some pieces related to each of them, but they just don't gel. And it's really difficult to say, there's not one change that needs to be made. The amendments need to be, there's a number of amendments that need to be done to really bring this up to snuff.
On the topic of carbon budgets, you've heard the back and forth with the minister comparing the UK's carbon budget approach to the approach he chose to take with climate targets. I believe the words he used were dancing on the head of a pin. Maybe potato would be a better comparison. But I'm wondering what your perspective is on this. Are these essentially similar approaches, just phrased differently, or are there key substantive differences between the carbon budget approach and the climate target approach?
I would say that there are substantive differences, but done well, a targeting approach involving targets can achieve many of the same functions that a carbon budget approach takes. One of them, the key points, is the one that I mentioned in my opening, and carbon budgets have always been established going out a number of years with carbon budgets covering different periods of time as opposed to one at a time. There's I think, no examples of internationally of carbon budgets being used a single budget at a time. The other thing is that carbon budgets, I think, are actually better for a jurisdiction like Canada in that it creates, it expresses the emissions over a multi-year period with in terms of how much we can emit as opposed to reductions relative to a base year. And so it creates there's more opportunity for businesses or local government or provincial governments or to take ownership over, here's how much I'm contributing, and seeing how that fits within broader conversation. So, I don't agree with the minister that carbon budgets are not well suited for Canada. That being said, if the government has decided to go with a targets-based approach, it can, if it does it well, and currently C12 doesn't do it well, if it does it well, it can certainly achieve many of the same goals.
Okay, thank you. We'll go now to our second and last round. I have Mr. Redekop, Mr. Baker, Madame Posey, Mr. Bachrach, Mr. Albas, and Ms. Sachs. If that's not correct, please let the clerk know. Mr. Redekop?
Thank you. Question for the Canadian cattleman. One of the major economic drivers in my home province, of course, is agriculture. And while in my riding, Saskatoon, we don't have a lot of farms, we do have feed mills and train hubs and food processing and many clients or constituents who work in these industries. And my son worked on a dairy farm for a while, which he loved, although it was the hardest job he's ever done. You guys, Ms. Jackson, you guys produced a great short film called Guardians of the Grassland. Can you just quickly describe the central message of that film?
Yeah, it was environmental organizations and beef producers talking about how Canadian grasslands are really Canada's Amazon rainforest or our coral reef, and what we need to do to protect them because they're disappearing at very alarming rates. And it's quite an emotional short film, 12 minutes long. Really encourage everybody to look it up.
Is that something you could provide to the committee so that we could watch that?
Absolutely, it would be our pleasure. Thanks.
All right, and I guess another question. I've heard people talk about beef production being harmful, and just wondering what is the impact of beef on other species, and how does that relate to what we're trying to accomplish here with C12?
Reynold, do you want to take that?
Certainly, I can. I think in terms of how beef production impacts other species, I mean, the beef production occurs on one of the most biodiverse landscapes in the world, in Canada in particular, and beef production it's occurring on natural habitats that developed under the influence of a large grazer, and maintaining the health of those rangelands means maintaining the health of everything that's on there, and preserving those rangelands. It maintains habitat for pollinators. It maintains habitat for thousands of different species of plants. It maintains habitat for all kinds of wildlife. It contributes obviously to carbon sequestration. We've talked about that, but watersheds and maintenance of habitat for migratory waterfowl, because we don't drain our wetlands, right? So it's very compatible with biodiversity. It supports them actually, and one of the big challenges we mentioned, the 80% loss of the northern Great Plains, that's led to significant habitat fragmentation. We've still got patches of northern Great Plains here and there, but it's shrinking and it's fragmenting, and that's not good for biodiversity.
So maybe related to that, I know that the cattle herd in Canada has faced significant reductions in the past couple decades. There was BSE, low profitability on farms. And in fact, it took a lot of heavy lifting, I think, by Prime Minister Harper and Agriculture Minister Jerry Ritz to kind of bring the beef sector back to profitability. But can you explain the unintended consequences of beef farmers when they exit the industry and what impact that has on greenhouse emissions?
Well, certainly. I mean, the number one thing, I mean, we just talked about biodiversity. When those grasslands get lost, when canola is worth $20 a bushel, one of the first things that happens is shelter belts get torn out. And the second thing that happens is marginal lands get torn out. And when we say marginal lands, those are lands that aren't really great for crop production, but it might be worth the risk when canola is worth $20 a bushel. But when that land gets cultivated, there, right off the bat, between 30 and 50% of the stored carbon enters the atmosphere, and it's like burning down the bank. Soil carbon is like a bank account, and we're depositing it, whether it's through good crop management or whether it's through good rangeland management. We're making incremental deposits in that carbon bank every year, but when we cultivate it, we lose it. Like burning down the bank with no insurance. We lose it very quickly, and it takes decades to get it back. So those would be the two big things I would point to: is loss of biodiversity and significant loss of sequestered carbon entering the atmosphere.
And what are the events that cause that loss then? Like what would cause somebody to cultivate a piece of land then?
Well, economics is largely the one that when the price is favorable for growing crops, whether it's regardless of the crop, when the price is high, there's an incentive to grow that. You don't pay the environmental cost right away. You see that over time.
Okay, we're pretty much out of time. We'll go now to Mr. Baker.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple of questions for a couple of the folks who are here, and I hope I can get to them. So I ask for your indulgence in helping to be as concise as you possibly can on a very complex topic. I thank you all for being here, though. Mr. Gage, first off with you, it's interesting you said you had a full head of hair when Canada started setting climate targets and started not meeting them. And it's interesting, I may lose my hair quickly as well, particularly in this line of work. But I'm actually pretty confident that Canada's going to start meeting those targets, and in part because I believe the government's committed to it, in part because I think Canadians consider this a priority and will support the government. But you spoke of something that I really want to ask you about, if I could, which is you spoke about the need, if I understood you correctly, to set more frequent targets and further in advance. And I'm wondering if you could, in 60 seconds or less, why do you believe that that's important?
I mean, as I indicated in my opening, climate change action requires the governments take short-term action to achieve, to bend the curve now, as we all familiar with COVID terminology, but it also requires that we put in place measures now that will start achieving further reductions 10 or 15 years out. And if you just set one plan at a time, government is focusing on achieving that target. They are not charged with considering what happens next. And so the minister, in his statement to you, actually said that the plan provides for rolling targets. That's not true. Rolling targets means you set more than one, and that when one expires, you set another. So the minister has indicated a couple of times that this is the intent here, but the legislation as drafted just has government either considering what happens between now and 2030 or in 5-year increments thereafter. And that doesn't really work in terms of considering both relevant and as well as the 2050 target as a long-term goal.
Okay. So your proposal, though, your recommendation is that those targets must be set further in advance. I think you said 10 years at one point or 15 years. Is that what does that address that problem?
And on a rolling basis, so that there will be.
Et ceci de façon cumulative. Bon, d'accord. I have a question now for Dr. Desrosiers. I represent a riding in the center of Toronto. Your colleague, Dr. Howard, described the impact on her community. I often feel that in the cities, we don't suffer the same impacts as in Dr. Howard's area. Could you describe to us for the committee, and perhaps for my people in my riding who are following this conversation, could you explain a little bit the impact of climate change on individuals who live in urban settings? Yes, well, thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief as possible. One of the most important impacts of climate change on the health of urban communities are exposures to extreme heat. Heat waves, in other words, which will become more and more frequent, will become more intense, and will last longer. So more intensity, more duration, and we know that when people are exposed, if we don't have any health problems, we can adapt. We have more resistance. But in underprivileged areas or marginalized communities, they live in towers often. It's all concrete. There's no green space. And in the southern part of the country, the impact of heat on individuals will be very significant as a contributing factor for fatalities, for morbidity. a number of other underlying conditions, of course, cardiac conditions, strokes, diabetes. All these are very common illnesses in a good part of the population, and they are cofactors for an early death because of extra stress brought on by climate change. Also, stress, mental stress from floods, as we've seen in central Quebec recently. Thank you. Mr. Chair, 15 or so seconds. Well, thank you very much. Excellent questions, however. Very, very good questions in very short order. Madame Posey, 2.5 minutes, please. Can you add his 15 seconds? Don't waste time. Go ahead and take it. I have another question for Dr. Pétrin Desrosiers, and a brief answer, I hope, because I have another question for Mr. Gage. What good suggestions could you make to improve this bill? Well, very briefly, the first is to have an objective, a target for 2025. Don't work too much in the long term. We need results now. Secondly, the advisory committee should be an independent, arm's length from government, specialist advisors with health representatives, with the necessary resources to do their analyses, the analytics, and to provide, be able to speak truth to power and not have to worry about any reprisals. Then the last part is UNDRIP alignment. Well, thank you. Listening to you speak, and Dr. Howard, are there doctors on that committee? Now, my next question for Mr. Gage. You were very hard in your judgment of the bill. Do you believe that, well, there's a role for the environmental commissioner, I suppose. It might be more aesthetic than anything else. But do you believe that this consultative organization should have a legal existence in the bill itself, and how can they cooperate more closely?
Body will really should have a legal status, which I think it absolutely should. I think that it should have a more a clearer role in sort of actually doing some of that evaluation of government progress on the bill, and as is the case in the UK Act. The commissioner's role, as written, is on auditing essentially the implementation of the plan. And taken broadly, that's probably helpful. But the key question is not just are we implementing what we said we'd do, but are we achieving the results that are necessary to get where we need to go? And that the commissioner could have an expanded role to do that, but we certainly have been pressing for the advisory body to play that role.
OK. Alors, on passe de rien à M. Bachrach pour 2 minutes.
Mr. Bachrach, 2.5 minutes.
Chair. Mr. Gage and Mr. Andrews, I wonder if you could share your perspective on the discussion around the need for a 2025 milestone as part of Bill C-12.
Andrew, maybe I'll go first and hand over to you. Look, I think a 2025 target would undoubtedly improve the bill, and it'd provide that more immediate accountability checkpoint. But again, I'd bring it back to the need for detail in plans, because if you think about it, the real key accountability checkpoint in the next few years will be that first plan prepared pursuant to the bill. And it's absolutely critical that that plan charts a credible path to the steep emissions cuts we need to see by 2030. And to do that, it needs to contain some of the detail that I've spoken about.
And to add to that, I think it needs to include very clear information on how we will make deep cuts in the next 5 years as well, before the 2025 target. I don't think there's any doubt that we would prefer to see a 2025 target, but we also think, again, if the government is resisting that, clearly it can be achieved through the types of details in the plans and clear accountability reporting at an early date.
Under C12 as it's currently written, if the government is not on track to achieve its milestones, does the bill, and we understand that prior to hitting the milestone because of the reporting measures, does the bill currently require the minister to take corrective measures that get the government back on track towards meeting that target?
Well, this is one of the features of the bill that perhaps hasn't received as much attention as it should. It's actually quite a positive provision that would require this kind of advanced warning mechanism. So if we see that there's a risk that a target's going to be missed, there's a requirement on the minister to take that corrective action. Unfortunately, as drafted, the provision is a little weak, but again, with some very simple amendments, that language could be strengthened so there is a clearer and firmer obligation on the minister to come forward with those corrective measures.
One of the concerns I think related to that is that the progress reports are currently happening only once during each plan's mandate, which doesn't give you long to correct and see whether, and just before the end of the mandate. So it doesn't provide much time to actually course correct.
Great. Mr. Albas, 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for making time for our committee and appreciate your expertise and sharing it with ourselves and all Canadians. First of all, I'd like to start with the Cattlemen's Association. I read a book called The Tyranny of Metrics, and sometimes if you only focus on certain numbers, you get certain results, but you're blind to other things. And one of the things that you mentioned in the Grasslands video was the importance of natural sequestration. As the targets in the bill, specifically the net zero target, refer to anthropogenic emissions and reductions, there doesn't seem to be any mechanism for collecting and reporting on non-anthropogenic emissions and sequestration. Would adding that to the report so Canadians can see the entire emissions picture something that we as a committee should consider in C12?
We would absolutely support holistic policy analysis with full data, because certainly when you get really tunnel focused in one direction, you can lose the forest for the trees. And so, or perhaps the grass for the grasslands is a better example here. So we think that it's very important. And I would also like to say that I think all of agriculture offers this really amazing nature-based solutions. So whether you're looking at crops or livestock, I think that the sector should really be looked at as a key sector for both economic growth and environmental outcomes that we're looking for.
So COP26 is going to be focusing largely on nature-based climate solutions. Mr. Gage from West Coast Environmental Law, do you agree that there should be something in C12 that has reporting on the non-anthropogenic emissions and sequestration in Canada, so the public at large has a better picture?
Certainly, sequestration is hugely important, obviously, and carbon sinks are absolutely critical. I think that if that's something the committee wants to add to the bill, that could potentially make sense. I would caution against rolling it into the existing planning and reporting structures without careful consideration, simply because right now the structure of the bill is you look at the government sets a target, it plans to achieve that target, it implements measures to do that, and then reports on that. So it would be a significant restructuring. I think it would make more sense to have a separate requirement for a report on carbon sinks rather than trying to roll it into that process. But in principle, it seems like a good idea.
Okay, thank you for that. One other area is under 15, Section 2 of the bill. The minister, can include other information when he's giving these reports. Obviously, he's mentioned in his own testimony today that Canada is not a unitary state, and obviously provinces and territories should be respected. I find that interesting because he doesn't find time to talk to them about tripling his carbon tax, but then suddenly says that it's good to have collaboration. I actually think collaboration should be from the start. Do you think that adding a provision in the bill so that there is a summary of provincial efforts on achieving our net zero or our Paris national objectives, what do you think about including a provincial summary of actions?
Well, one of our recommendations is actually that a summary of the provincial actions that the government is relying on to achieve the milestone target be included in the plans, along with modeling associated with that, in which case an assessment report would presumably also report.
Perfect. I'd like to ask again, the Cattlemen's Association, do you believe, because I believe most of your members are provincially regulated, and in my province, for example, most of them are crown lands that they're grazing?
Certainly coordination across the provinces and the federal government, whether it's through this or through offset protocols or through, any other, I suppose, initiative on climate change is going to be extremely important to make sure we get that right. Because if it's too confusing, I think, that's where we run into not being able to achieve the goals that we want to.
A lot of people ask me about the state of Canada's electrical grid, because many people, and I think partly because of Madame Posé's motion and subsequent study on electric vehicles, want to know where all of our power is going to be coming from. Mr. Gage, do you believe that perhaps there should be something just also summarizing the state of Canada's electrical grid, recognizing that this is under provincial regulation, but I still think giving a summary as to the state of our electrical grid will be important as we look at transportation electrification as being a principal focus for many of the actions of the government.
Very briefly, please.
Well, of course, the federal government, I think, plays a role for interprovincial grid aspects, and it may well be something that the government might choose to include in its plans or in reporting the strategies it's using. I guess there's a lot we'd like to see in the plan. I'm not sure whether that reaches the level of, yes, we totally want that required to be something included, but I'm not opposed to it being included.
Thanks very much. Finally, last but not least, Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses who've joined us today. Very fulsome conversation. I'd like to touch on a little bit on my colleague, Mr. Albus's comments about the provincial and federal relationship. I'm an apples to apples kind of gal, and the UK has been bandied about a lot of whether we're hitting the mark on the model there or not. But the UK is largely a unitary state. It doesn't have a constitutional framework like we do with sections 91 and 92 of the 1867 Act. And, does the UK have to work with other levels of government in the way we do in terms of the federal and provincial relationship? And we'll start there. Mr. Andrews or Mr. Gage can answer.
Well, as the resident Brit and half Scottish, I should probably take a first crack at that. Obviously, yes, Britain doesn't have quite the complex federal system that Canada has, but it's not exactly simple constitutionally, as you might have gathered from watching the news in recent years. Environmental issues are a devolved issue. So the UK government has to negotiate and cooperate with the devolved administrations of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So there are other examples of more complex constitutional arrangements that have effective climate legislation. Germany being another example of a federal system.
Germany's system is quite different than ours. The provinces there have much more power in their relationship. I'd like to focus really on the UK or perhaps New Zealand as peers.
Well, the UK it's different. They're devolved powers. So it's an apples and oranges situation. But I think taking a step back, the bigger point is that there will always be these more difficult challenges in terms of the constitutional arrangements between different state actors. It prevents a complete copy and paste from the UK to Canada. But I think the fundamentals of the UK Climate Act hold, particularly if we brought in these improvements that we've suggested around having more information about the measures that the provinces and territories are taking.
So a Made in Canada model, as this legislation proposes, with a nod to the UK model, would be a preferred situation, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. With key amendments.
Okay.
So the UK legislation. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
The UK legislation specifically says if the UK government is including measures that relate to the authority of Scotland or Wales, that they're required to consult, and it sets out some process. I mean, I think the concern here is that if you create an act that deals with the difficulties around talking to provinces just by pretending they don't exist, that we're not going to meet our targets either. So the importance of transparency around that we need to talk to the provinces and we need to ensure that measures that the provinces are doing are celebrated and put front and center in our plans is very helpful.
I understand. I'd like to touch on one more aspect of that to expand this, unpack this a little bit more. Section 10 includes implementation with provinces and territories and First Nations. So, the UK and New Zealand have a more direct route to implement in dealing with First Nations. I didn't hear much comment about that in terms of Section 10 in a review, either from Mr. Andrews or Mr. Gage.
Sorry, which section are you talking about? Sections 10 sub 3 then?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it allows the government to, it's actually one of the problematic sections, I think, in the sense that by saying that the plans may contain other information related to these other levels of government and business, et cetera, Indigenous governments, it allows the government an out for accountability. And ultimately, the federal government has to be the ones, if it's a true accountability act, saying we are accountable for ensuring that somehow, with all of the different pieces in play, we have a plan as a country to get to our target. And by saying may, rather than requiring that the government actually identify which measures they're relying on, that actually undermines the accountability considerably.
But yet again, it is a much more complex relationship than a simple unitary system where
absolutely
there's an opportunity for collaborative work. Okay, Mr. Chair, that's really the only key question I had.
I wanted to clarify that. Oui, effectivement. Une bonne question et des bonnes questions.
It was an excellent question. In fact, there were a lot of excellent questions from everyone. I would like to thank the team for having this very worthwhile discussion. We were able to learn a lot that will help us with this bill. It certainly gave us a broad perspective of many issues. I'd like to thank you very much. I would like to remind committee members that we are meeting again twice this week. Wednesday the 19th at 2 p.m. for another 3-hour session with 2 panels. So we will end there. I was wondering if someone could move to adjourn.
2 p.m. I'm just double checking.
No, 14h30 for 2:30.
Okay.
Sorry.
2:30.
Yeah. Are you proposing that we adjourn, Mr. Longfield?
I will now propose that we adjourn.
Fantastic.
And we'll see you at 2:30 on Wednesday.
Yeah, there seems to be unanimous consent. So thanks again to the witnesses and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.